now entering the Bass Galaxy.
This is Teal's Bass Galaxy. I'm your host. This podcast is about raw, real conversations with real awesome people about bass fishing, bass boats, and heck, there are no limits in the galaxy. Teal's Bass Galaxy is brought to you by Veselka Fishing and Customs and just north of Memphis Barbecue, also known as JNO Memphis. This next guest is a super special one. There's only a few names in tournament bass fishing that come to mind in Minnesota when you think about pro tournament bass fishermen. This is a guy I looked up to since I was a kid. This is a guy who pioneered the football jig up in the state of Minnesota. He's a tournament legend in the state and beyond. Minnetonka, he's won the Fort Francis championship 5 times with his partner Joel Thrun. And nationally, he's competed at a high level, almost winning AOI twice on the FLW Pro Tour. And this dude's won $1.6 million on the FLW Pro Tour. And he's won well over $2 million in his career bass fishing, ladies and gentlemen. I'm excited for this one. This is fun stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Moynagh. You've been fishing longer professionally than any of us could ever dream to. You're a pioneer in the sport here in Minnesota, and you're somebody I've looked up to since I was like a kid. So Jim, thanks so much for coming out today.
All right. Well, you're welcome. Happy to come out and spread the love of bass fishing.
Dude, I know this is just another day for you, but I want you to know, man, this is a dream come true for me. I remember as a kid, just obsessed with bass fishing. I would read articles about Jim Moynagh on Lake Minnetonka, Jim Moynagh, across the nation. And as a kid, my favorite lure was a football jig, and I want to give you all the credit for that because you were kind of the angler that inspired me to kind of go learn what the bottom felt like where I grew up, and understanding what was down there and triggering bites with it.
So how did you learn how to use it? Because it's not a typical bait, and it's kind of niche. It's kind of niche specific. So it's not like a spinnerbait where you can go to any lake, throw it at any time, and at least catch northerns or whatever, and bass hopefully. But a football jig, it's more of you can't have algae laying on the bottom, you can't have scrubby weeds laying on the bottom. It ain't gonna come through that. Right. You gotta have some kind of sand, gravel, rock. But if you get too much rock, like Canadian Shield Lake, if you don't know what you're doing, you're gonna lose 5 of them in 5 minutes. To those rocks up there.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I probably really didn't know how to throw it right away, but I read. I remember on All Terrain Tackle's website there was a really good article that went pretty in depth about a few different ways you could fish it. That was kind of written by you. But the big thing for me is I grew up on the horseshoe chain, and there was something, I can't remember if it was you or something else I had read about, even just understanding vegetation or what's below the surface. I didn't have a depth finder. I had a little 14-foot boat, right? But I was pretty sick of throwing a buzzbait, a frog, and a spinnerbait and, stuff that all the shallow stuff I had done as a kid, and I wanted to expand my horizons a little bit. Well, that football jig I could throw out and catch a coontail clump and understand that at least there was coontail there, and then I could cast 10 feet to the right of that because I was a dumb kid and had spare time to see if there was hard bottom on the other side of that. And I didn't learn as much as I did when I got my electronics, but learning that you could change the speed of a football jig and get a different result when you did find that cast with hard bottom. Along with just, I think it's probably one of the most fun bites that you can experience along with that hook set. But I think I'd rather ask you how to fish a football jig, Jim, to be honest with you, because I think you were kind of the first. You brought it here. A lot of people, I used to think you basically invented it in my eyes, but from what I heard, you kind of brought it over from California.
Yeah. We'll just set the record straight on that.
Let's go into the belly of the beast here.
Yeah. So this would be back in the early 90s, probably 90, 91, something like that. So I was working for a book publishing company that published outdoor books. So one series of books they had was called the Hunting and Fishing Library. So I was working on content development for that book.
Sure.
So I was kind of like a researcher, so to speak.
Sure.
Which meant I got to talk to fishing guides, fishing pros, fisheries biologists, and just talk to them, interview them for content for the books that we put out. I wasn't necessarily the author for these books, but I'd gather all this information, sit down with the author, the writers, discuss it, and then they would put the periods and punctuation in the right places, and put the paragraphs in the right places, and make it all make sense.
Yep. I love it.
So I was in the course of writing a book called Advanced Bass Fishing, which I was credited as being part author on that one. Went out west.
Hold on. That one?
What? Oh, no, not that one. Same title.
Smokes, that would have been crazy.
Same title.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. Carry on. I was about to be mind blown. But.
No, that's I don't know. I gotta look inside that one. Let me look in it right now. I just
okay.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, no, get in there.
Okay.
I don't think I remembered.
That's a completely different authored book. Same title though.
Well, I'll get a lawyer involved. We can sue these guys if you want. I'm just kidding. This was Jim's book. No, so anyway, you wrote a book, Advanced Bass Fishing.
Well, I was like co-author, and so basically what we did in that book is we highlighted some different techniques that were more on the cutting edge at that time.
Sure.
And the football jig was one of these things I ran across out west. By two different anglers were kind of introduced to me out west. One was a California angler named Randy Best.
Okay.
And the other one, his name was Ted Miller out of Phoenix. And this Ted Miller was winning everything out there with this bait. And it's what he threw a ton of. And he actually fished on the at the top level of Bassmaster for a few years. Ted Miller did.
Sure.
He was in it for a while, and then it's one of those decisions you make. It's not quite for me, so he got out of it. But anyways, when I was just so fascinated by this bait because I knew back in Minnesota that there were a lot of bass hanging out on deeper rock piles, especially after they're done spawning.
Yep.
And I knew this because one of our good contacts in this local area.
Yep.
One of the best all multi-species fishermen you could ever. I mean, this guy's caught more fish than just of any kind than probably anybody in Minnesota. Is Dick Grzinski, who's known as the Grizz. Have you ever heard of the Grizz?
Yep.
So just in casual conversations with him when we'd be doing business with him, he'd talk about, oh yeah, I'm catching these, catching all these bass on Sasago off of these rock piles or South Center or whatever, because that was kind of his neck of the woods. So I'm like, God, there's got to be the same thing going on in all these, Minnetonka and all these other lakes. So when I came across this football jig out west, I was like, man, it was meant to fish rocks.
Yep.
And I'm like, and then when I was using it out west, I was just, I got to feel how it felt on the bottom and everything. I'm like, man, this, I can tell when I'm dragging this through the soft, mushy stuff. I can tell when that, where you don't want to be. Mm-hmm. I can tell when it hits the gravel. I can tell when it might hit a bigger boulder. I'm like, man, this is a cool tool. So I just brought them here and, just went to work at. There was no blueprint as how to go about it here.
Sure.
So, but I just kind of took what I've heard from the Grizz and what and then the actual how you fish it from the guys out west. Just kind of put it together and figure out how to make it work on Lake Minnetonka and some other lakes around here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the offshore aspect of fishing in the early 90s is a heck of a lot different than the offshore aspect of fishing today. Just positioning the boat right. I mean, so California, right, there's not a lot of grass. Right. So throwing a football jig, you can miss and, still keep your bait clean a lot of times on the way back. In Minnesota, you miss, you might have a load of milfoil coming back to your curly leaf or coontail.
Exactly.
I mean, the fact that you brought that up here, and figured it out, but there was things you knew that you applied when you did that for fishing offshore, which is a heck of a lot different than it is today because we didn't have forward-facing sonar. We didn't have side imaging then in 91. Right. Well, I wasn't even born, so there wasn't even a we then, right?
Yeah.
It was marker buoys, 2D sonar, and was there even GPS?
Well, it would be like flashers, really, is what I was using back then. And but it took me, I was introduced to the football head in 91 or whatever it was, and it wasn't until 94. It took me 3 years to really kind of get trying to start getting the pieces to actually make it work for me.
Right.
Because the first few times I went after it with it, it's looking back on it, it's okay, that was obviously the wrong depth for that time of year to be using it, or,
sure,
it just wasn't the right situation. But as I was using it more and more, I started, it's okay, in this situation, man, I just caught 4 4-pounders right here under these conditions. So then you start realizing that, what works for it and what doesn't,
right?
According to weather, according to, the seasonal movements of bass and so forth. So, so it wasn't until 94 where it really started breaking out for me. And then, so then once I started getting all that stuff falling in place, then I already had a good background of shallow fishing and have some success there. But when I brought this deep water part into it with the football jig, these fish were untouched by people.
No company out there.
No. I mean, you could go to all these different spots in Minnetonka and not have any worry as to if anybody even fished there. There were a few guys. You had your deep crankers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Mark
Ravelings. You had Brad Leiferman.
Yep.
Brad Leifer, there used to be a tournament called the Don Shelby U.S. Invitational.
Oh, yeah. Famous.
Paid $50,000 first place. Brad won 2 of those back-to-back, deep cranking. So he was doing that deep cranking, as it turns out. At the time, I didn't know it, but it turns out a lot of places where I ended up catching them off the football jig.
Sure.
So he was fishing, the right places with a crankbait.
Yep.
And then I came along, started finding some of the same places, but then, of course, a lot of places that were more specific to just me knowing them, and catching them off a football jig. And that's the other thing, man. See, back in those days, there was no detailed mapping.
Right.
So it was your mapping was everything that you could drive over with your flasher. That was your mapping. And then you got to remember, okay, this is, and it's all, and then you're doing all this triangulation off of the shorelines. It's
right.
Okay, when I look this way and that flagpole lines up with the left side of that picture window, I know I got this one figured out, and then, then over here it's, in the background I got the left side of that water tower lines up with this boat ramp,
Right.
So then that puts you right on the spot where you want to be throwing. So, and then like you said, because there's a lot of weeds on Minnetonka, so a lot of times some of those spots were tricky to hit the right spot.
Oh, yeah.
Because you throw it out, and if you missed, 10, 15 feet either way, you're in a hunk of weeds.
Which is easy to do on open water when you're trying to triangulate a tree from 100 yards away.
Yes, and marker buoys were critical because when you finally hit the right cast and you start feeling that football jig come through the right rock, man, that's when you want to have that buoy down in the water so you can put your trolling motor right next to the buoy and just make that repeated cast.
Yeah.
So,
Dude, I have so much respect for that. It seemed, God, so, I mean, what was everyone else doing?
well, at that, back in those days, Ted Capra was a really dominant angler in Minnetonka and Ravelings.
Oh, yeah.
And like Ted and his kids, Tony, Dean, their big thing was, flipping the milfoil with heavy jigs and that. And, and jig worms. I'd seen Raveling and that throwing a lot of jig worms. So they're throwing worms and jigs in the milfoil. And they're having really good luck with that. But when a lot of those fish would move out, it seems like the bigger fish would move out of the milfoil, out on the rocks, leaving a fish still in the milfoil, but a smaller class.
Sure.
So it's just that's just how it was. And so when I started figuring out how to catch them off those deeper edges and when, it was hard. I was tough to beat then.
Yeah, you were. Everyone talks about that stretch, man.
You run into. I mean, certainly I ran into tournaments where I'm like, God, why aren't they here? What? And you stumble, you don't catch them, or catch them very good. But but there was many. I mean, man, I put a lot of money in the bank back then off of those rock piles.
Well, dude, think about it. Like, you can't really unlock a lake like that anymore. Like, that way, it was like, I mean, you were fishing a different world than everybody. Even the deep crankers, you're getting more distance on your cast. It's on the bottom longer, and they ain't seen it before.
See the deep crankers. The deep crankers, they were getting the hot fish typically off the spot. But if those fish weren't hot or they just weren't into it, I mean, sometimes, you know how it is. Sometimes those fish just want something moving slow, and they want to kind of think about it, and then, okay, I'll go get it. If you're throwing a crankbait and they're in that kind of mood, the crankbait's going to be way away from them before they ever decide that, hey, maybe I want that. Well, it's too late.
Right.
The fish ain't going to get it at that point.
Oh man, I have so many questions, Jim. So learning how to fish that football jig, I guess, was there a particular way that you had found especially success with early on, and did that change? Like, did you condition the fish to the point where you had to change how you work the jig?
One person can't condition all the fish in Minnetonka.
I believe that.
Yeah, so no.
Takes 200 high schoolers and 500 bass clubs and about 500 other degenerates, I suppose, like me.
Yeah. One guy on that Bywater can't condition them,
right?
But so my whole deal was just throw it out there, reel it. If you feel the bait land in the soft stuff, you just move it fast until you get to the really stuff where you really start feeling that bait just trickle over the gravel on that, and then you slow it down. Sure. And you wiggle it a little bit, let it sit, and then move it a little bit, let it sit. And looking back on it now, that's not always how you want to do it.
Right.
Sometimes that is, but other times when the fish are really aggressive and maybe you're searching for fish, you don't need to do it. You can throw it out there and just kind of slowly reel it and bounce it through there. And then of course there's other tweaks I've done with it over like, for whatever reason, on the Tennessee River lakes, especially those lakes, they really like it. They like it popped off the bottom sometimes. Like, just not hard, actually a little short. They have a technique down there that's goes beyond before I even start throwing up a football jig. They call it stroking, which is taking like just a regular all-terrain jig like this, the AT jig, and they just pop it way off the bottom with just big strokes of the rod. So what I'm talking about, what I'm doing, the popping with the football jig is maybe just popping it like 10 inches off, just little like this.
Kind of like snapping a tube.
Almost, yeah. And man, sometimes those fish really fire on that for some reason, but not always, because I've had I mean, sometimes it really works so good. I don't know why. Sometimes it works, and then the next day you can go out and it doesn't. Because I had that happen on Pickwick Lake one time, where I went out and it was just pop that thing, and then you feel them grab it. And then the next day, this was an FLW tournament. I went back to some of the same spots, pop it, nothing. Meanwhile, the co-angler catching fish, just dragging a worm back there.
Sure.
So doesn't always work. And then, in fact, by the end of that, before that day ended up switching to just dragging a Carolina rig with a soft plastic bait on it and catching my fish that way. But for whatever reason, that one day, probably has something to do with the way they move a lot of current through those lakes. And
Sure.
it might have had something to do with the amount of current flow, whatever.
That current pull seems to be a big freaking deal down there.
Yeah, it is on those Tennessee. It's the Tennessee River lakes we're talking about. So you're talking Gunnersville, Chickamauga, Watts Bar, Kentucky Lake, Wheeler Lake, Nickajack, Wilson, Pickwick. So all and Fort Loudon. There's probably a couple others I'm not thinking of. But yeah, the whole thing is when there's no current, those fish kind of just meander off of the structure, just following bait around or whatever. But when the current kicks in, then they're conditioned to go to these certain spots where the water rushing over that structure presents a great opportunity for them to capture bait that's moving downstream towards them with the current.
I think the first time that kind of educated me on that, I don't know if you remember like the old Ultimate Match fishing deals on like Kentucky Lake, Kelly Jordan with the spoon, stuff like that, where like the current would completely turn on or turn off the bite, almost like a moon phase or a weather change would up here,
Yeah.
It's crazy. But so that football jig, Jim, you have amassed, I think, at least $1.6 million in your career in winnings, which is insane. For a guy from Minnesota, how much of that was on a football jig, would you say?
Okay, that 1.6 million those are my FLW winnings.
Those are just FLW.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
you gotta be over two.
If we're gonna.
Yeah, no. Let me make sure I get it right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we have to. I don't know. I would have to say. Whenever you fish a multi-day tournament, it's rarely is every fish you catch on one bait.
Right.
As much as I'd throw a football jig sometimes. I mean, there were certain years where it was like it's all I threw, and then it was more of a boom or bust, But
yep.
It's certainly. It helped me win that $200,000 win on Tonka that early in my career.
What tournament was that again?
That was the 1997. It was one of the qualifying tournaments with FLW.
Yep.
But back then they had one special tournament. It wasn't their championship, but they called it the FLW Forrest Wood Open.
Sure.
Whereas later on they started calling their championship the Forrest Wood Cup.
Yep.
So some people think I won the championship back then, but no, it was just a special. I mean, I won the tournament, but it was just like a special regular season tournament.
$200K on Lake Minnetonka.
Yeah,
though.
yeah, they had.
Holy
so you had
smokes.
elevated entry fee, but also an elevated payout.
Yep.
I mean, so I won that, and. So that was 200 there, and I've used it to win. I don't know, lots of. I've got 2 second places on Pickwick Lake, and it played a massive role in both of those second places.
I mean, you finished well on Pickwick, Kentucky Lake. I mean, there's even you've done well at the Potomac multiple times. I mean, I'm talking top 40s, top 30s, stuff like that.
Yeah.
You've really had some epic finishes down south.
Yeah, I'm.
Which isn't easy to do for guys up here, and that's
it's not easy. And in fact, I haven't won down south yet after all these years. I've got multiple seconds, thirds, fourths.
Who has though?
And all that. Well,
from Minnesota. Seth's one on Mille Lacs. Austin's one in South Dakota.
Keith Tuma won on the Harris
Chain.
Chain.
Yep.
Seth won. Where was that again?
Mille Lacs.
Oh yeah,
twice.
Yeah.
Once.
I'm thinking. Well, you won on lacrosse too, but I'm thinking like Southern Fisheries.
Right.
God, who else from Minnesota? There has to be some guys that were not. Oh, Andy Young won.
Oh,
on,
yeah.
What was it? It was not Falcon, but the other Amistad. Yeah.
Yep.
So he won that.
Yep.
And Andy Young, of course, he's up on guides on Mille Lacs now, right? That's from what I know.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's a couple more guys, but Bob Downey.
Oh yes,
He won that
yes,
tournament.
He won that Open down on
Grand Lake.
Grand.
Yep.
Yep.
So
we've named 3. Is my point. It's not easy to do.
it is not easy.
Like, I was going to ask you that. So, I mean, the Minnesota tournament fishing, I think, has kind of regurgitated itself since 08 or since 2010. It's really kind of taken off.
Oh, I love it. When I look at the Bassmaster Elite roster and see the Minnesota representation there now, I just like, yeah, all right,
It's cool to see.
It's really cool to see. And I wish I was on that roster representing. I'm fishing the MLF side, and I have a choice every year which way to go, and it seems like every year it just seems the situation favors me staying with MLF, but it's something I always, for the last multiple seasons or off seasons, I've always I've taken serious looks at the Bassmaster side of things, and I don't know, it just hasn't quite put me over the edge. I did just do some opens about 4 or 5 years ago, did a few of them, but I don't know, I just haven't just the MLF, just for me, seems like it's better I stay there, but it's something I redress every off season.
Well, it seems like
in recent years, especially.
Right. It seems like there's no shortage of talent in bass fishing, and it seems like there's so much ability there. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, what separates those guys? And I was going to ask you this, like, how much of a disadvantage is a Minnesota guy at, like, going to try to do something like that? Because it really seems like there's one, but yet we have such good diverse fisheries. I think partially is our fish are a little bit dumber up here, which maybe doesn't help us down there, but I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
That's something I think about. I've had my own little debates in my head on that over the years, because obviously I could have relocated down south many years ago if I wanted to. I think there is an advantage to just being on the water year round.
Yep.
I think there is an advantage, and not only, it becomes really, really important nowadays, because nowadays you can't rely all your income. You can't just say, okay, I'm just going to get my income from tournament winnings. It just doesn't work that way anymore.
No.
For a while there, with FLW was so good in the 2000s that you could. You didn't need nothing else. I mean, if you were catching fish, the tournament winnings were just fine.
Right.
But we don't have that now. Our payouts aren't as high, and the cost is quite a bit more. So you got to have other income sources. So it seems like a person that wants to be a professional fisherman and wants to do a lot of tournament fishing, but you still need this other income. So it seems like to me, if you lived in the South, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, somewhere in there, you're going to be central to all the tournaments. You're going to have less travel time, less expenses traveling. Then you're going to have more time on the water, because months, we got our lakes are frozen here in Minnesota right now. There's guys in Texas and Alabama and Florida. They're out there testing new products that people are coming out with. Mm-hmm. We don't get that chance to test and experiment with things living here. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can go out and test the latest ice jig.
Right.
but
new tickler minnows coming out, I hear.
Yeah, yep. You don't want to. Maybe you do want to see my ice fishing gear. It's circa 1980s, but anyways,
Blade bait.
yeah. But my point is, I think you have a better chance of making a career out of it being in the South, because you're around open water at all times of year. You're available to test things at all times of year. You can play with ideas in your head. You can always be just on the water whenever you need to be. Whereas up here, for me, it's the one thing you got about being in the North, and this was kind of what I always held on to in my head. So there was a time where I was like the only national touring pro from Minnesota.
Yep.
So in my head, I'm like, it's an advantage to me because I'm the only guy from this area.
Right.
Okay. So I don't have to compete for sponsors or representation. This is the market that I'm from, that I represent. So I always thought, well, sponsors are going to value that because there's nobody else up there.
Right.
So if somebody wants to sell product in Minnesota, bass fishing products, well, I felt like I had leverage to help, maybe pick up that type of sponsor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But that leverage ain't so much anymore because we do have so many high profile fishermen. Bass pros.
You got a lot. I mean, just
which is
in
cool.
general, people competing for sponsorship now and stuff, and that just seems like pro fishing, man. It's a tough. It's not an easy life, and a lot of people don't make it as long as you have doing it.
Yeah.
Because of the cost, because of all of those things. So I just hats off to you, man.
I can't believe I'm still doing it.
Dude, never stop, dude. You got it in your veins, man.
Oh, I know. It's I know it. It's
can't take it with you.
Can't take it with you. No, you can't. I know it certainly has challenges though, because when it comes down to it, it's really the top few percentage of bass pros that really are making a good living at it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not in that percentage group. So it's just a little more challenging. But, on the financial side of things, especially
Attention all smallmouth anglers. Have you thrown the marabou jig? Have you thrown the hair jig? Well, if you have, you're going to want to listen right now. This podcast is brought to you by Veselka Fishing and Customs, a custom rod shop based out of Minnesota, and he has developed the answer, folks. What if I told you you could throw that marabou jig 30 to 50% further than you're casting it right now? Well, Dane, Mr. Veselka himself, has developed the answer. It's a custom 8-foot hair jig rod developed on a steelhead fly blank. He's put custom fly guides on this, so you're really going to be able to outcast the competition, catch more smallmouth. They aren't going to see you. What more do you need? Here's what I need you to do right now. Visit veselkafishing.com. That's VOCELKA fishing.com. This is the 8-foot hair jig rod, but this guy can build you anything you want. If you can dream it, he can do it. This episode is brought to you by just north of Memphis Barbecue. This is World Champion Barbecue. If you smoke meat and you don't like good barbecue, I do not know what to tell you right now besides you need to try some of this stuff. They've got their rub. They've got their sauces right on their website. They've got their famous dry rub award-winning seasoning that you can put on ribs, brisket, pulled pork, chicken, wings, anything you like to put on the smoker, on the oven, on the grill, any meat you like to cook, you need some of this dry rub seasoning in your life. But don't forget the sauce, because that's award-winning world champion sauce here. No matter what flavor you like, they've got 3 different sauces, and they are all good. You can drink them straight out the bottle. We've got Sweet Christie's for all you sweet-loving barbecue folk. We've got Christie's Mischief for all you spicy bass anglers out there. And then we've got Christie's Gold. And they'll sell all 3 of them in a combo. But you need to go to their website right now. It's jnomemphis.com. That's jnomemphis.com. Dry rub, sauce, barbecue. Let's go!
Just like we mentioned earlier, with the way the payouts are going, the way the entry fees going,
Right.
and the cost of boats, tackle,
Fuel,
all that stuff. It's just it's eating into those tournament winnings that we used to have greater margins for tournament winnings than
Right.
what we do now. So.
Well, the sport seems to have evolved so much at such a rapid pace. I guess you've seen such a change, and you've seen probably more phases in that whole evolution of tournament fishing that I guess a lot of people my age and younger, got to maybe hear about but didn't get to see. I mean,
yeah, I definitely have seen. It's been interesting to see how things have changed. It's from many different sides of it, whether it's sponsorship side or actual strategies and techniques and that side of it. Yeah, I've seen a lot of changes. But one thing, here's something that's for anybody that has any aspiration of being at the top of the game competitively, is you can't never stop. You can't just sit back and think to yourself, well, I've learned it all, because there's always new stuff and there's always new trends. And that's always, whenever I've had a spike in my performance, like over 1 or 2 years or something, it's always because I've gotten onto something that it's kind of newer. Other people aren't quite up on it yet. But the spike comes down because other people figure it out, and now they're doing the same thing.
Right.
So you always have to be trying to find that little wrinkle that's going to have you targeting fish that other people aren't, or something's happened. So you're doing something that other people quite aren't onto. So that just puts you ahead of the game a little bit. And I've seen that I'll just give you some examples. Back before I turned pro, I was in a bass club called the Tackle Busters Bass Club here in Minnesota.
Sure.
And I mean, things were so crude back then. This is like mid to late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, bass fishing was just so minuscule here in Minnesota compared to what it is now.
Right.
So when jigs hit the scene nationally, for whatever reason, our club really took them to heart. And I mean, our bass club, like we whenever you'd have every year there'd be a state tournament, and our club did really good in these state tournaments, winning the title a couple times and doing well, and that's all because we were jig fishing before most guys up here were.
Sure.
I mean, that was a big part of it. So, but eventually everybody's jigs fishing, or a lot of people, and then now everybody's doing the same thing, and you just don't have that edge. So that's one example. Another example would be like what we talked about, the football jig. When I kind of got that going, nobody else is doing it, and it was working, and it worked good. So that my performance, my finishes were peaked really well for a few years there. Same thing with when it came to sight fishing, okay?
Sure.
Sight fishing is a hard skill to learn in Minnesota because bass fishing season's off limits. At least it used to be back then. So, because I was fishing on the national tour, I was doing a lot of sight fishing down south. And so when I bring that up here, I mean, I was ahead of a lot of the guys up here doing that. So a lot of sight fishing tournaments up here, I did really well. In fact, my favorite, they used to have Ranger used to sponsor a tournament. I forget the name of it. But George Little, who was with Ranger Boats back then, he
it's my Vexus rep now.
He put on this tournament with Ranger where the full field would fish Minnetonka for like 2 days.
Sure.
And then they'd take the top 10 finishers and put them on a little lake called Lake Harriet, Minneapolis, which was, I don't know if you've ever been there, but
I've heard of it.
It's
tiny,
100 acres, whatever.
So
they put us there. So, and it was always in like June. So on Minnetonka, I was really in tune with those fish were mostly early summer type fish where they're just starting to school. They're just starting to get out on the edges of stuff. Where I had a really good feel for that. And And to make it to the top 10, pretty much that's what you had to be doing.
Yep.
So I was competing against all these guys, or all the top 10 guys that came out of Minnetonka were all really good at fishing in the milfoil, edges of milfoil.
Yep.
But we'd go to Lake Harriet, it's a bowl, deep.
Got it.
So it was colder, and those fish were always on their peak spawn when we'd go over there.
Okay.
Yeah. So because I had much more sight fishing experience than all the other 9. I mean, some of the other guys were all right with it, but I mean, I had such a big advantage because I had all the sight fishing experience, and these guys didn't have near as much. So
because it was largemouth, and bass opener wasn't until like end of May, Memorial Weekend. Back then.
Yeah, and there was no catch and release season.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
largies are usually done by then.
Yeah.
So, yep.
So the guys I'm competing with on Lake Harriet are all weed fishermen. They're not sight fishermen.
Yep.
And however, those Lake Harriet fish were like dead nuts on their spawn. I mean, the big females are up on the beds, big males. So
yep.
So I ended up winning a couple boats, and those boats were given away for those tournaments. So those were boats. I mean, it wasn't It wasn't always a big. I mean, I think both times that I won that tournament, it was a fairly like a half-pound difference between me and the next guy. So it wasn't like I was dominating, but still, you had that edge. I had that edge.
Yep.
Over most of those guys.
Yep. Yep.
And so having that edge. It's just, and it just goes on and on. Like when the Senko first came out,
I was gonna say the Senko is one of them deals.
I can almost guarantee you this: the first time the Senko ever appeared in a Bassmaster literature, as far as being like, they always used to interview the top 5 guys and then write it up in the Bassmaster.
Yep.
I was probably the first one that ever listed the Senko as like one of my primary baits, because they used to have a tournament called the Mega Bucks.
Okay.
And so I finished 3rd in that tournament, and the Senko was like a big part of it.
Sure.
And I thought, and the only reason I said anything was like because the Senko, it was such a stupid looking lure. I'm like, nobody's ever going to take this serious. I'll just say, yeah, I caught him on the Senko, which I did. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it was kind of bummed me out. Just to continue with this story, it was like 4 years later, I show up at Table Rock, and everybody's like, Senko this, Senko that, and I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah,
I thought nobody was throwing this thing. Well, now on Table Rock, everybody was, and I was like, I'm so just depressed about that. I seriously, for the next 2 years, I never even tied one on. I was just so depressed about it. But that kind of thing goes on and on. When the good mapping first came out, that was such a huge advantage. I got on the front end of that. And now we got the forward facing sonar. We're still on the front end of that, but we're pretty much most guys are going to have that, by the end of the year probably.
Yep.
And the advantage of just having it ain't going to be good enough.
Right.
It's going to be having it and knowing the best places to apply it. This niche situations where it's going to work the best.
Yep.
And then eventually everybody will know all that stuff, and then it'll have to be something else that puts a person in, puts them above the rest.
Right.
That's a competitive angler has to chase that to some degree.
Yep.
Sometimes we chase it in technology, like with the mapping or the GPS or whatever, and other times we place that in the baits and techniques that we do. Right. Yeah.
Even, down to, like, I've noticed with certain casting angles, say on the river with current.
Yeah.
Like, there's a little something to that. Just talking through the Senko and certain baits made me think of also the A-rig. Remember when that first came out?
That was another one. Man, that instantly puts you way above the field.
They banned it. It was so good, right?
Yeah.
In bass, they banned it, right?
Yeah.
And then the marabou jig, kind of up north for smallmouth. It's not as good as it used to be, but it was.
I was on the front end of that one. Thanks to Jeff Gustafson.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, this was, some of those Rainy Lake winds that my buddy Joe and I had, right? I can directly tie it to that jig.
I mean,
that was when it was still a small group of people knowing it.
So that carries me into this one now. So you've won the Fort Francis deal, right?
Five times over.
Oh my gosh. Fort Francis,
And close to
Canadian bass champion 5 times.
Close to winning it several other times, but that was
Wow.
There were two.
Okay, we need to get into
this.
this.
There's 2 lakes that I've ever had dialed in extremely well.
Yep.
Minnetonka back in the early 90s,
Yep.
mid 90s, early 2000s. But now, I go out to Minnetonka now, it's a whole different game.
Oh gosh.
So I'm not dialed in there anymore.
I don't think anyone is.
Then Rainy Lake, we had that. Joe and I had that so dialed in, and then we're not as dialed in anymore because what happened? There was smelt in the lake.
Yep.
And there still is, but not as many. Not to the degree. And where the smelt were, or at least where we fished, was in the North Basin, or what they call the North Arm. And we had it so dialed in, knowing where to go, when, under which conditions.
Sure.
That we could always bring in a big bag of fish. Not always. There was times where you didn't, but so many times we did. And but then all those smelt died.
Yep.
For whatever reason, there was a mysterious smelt die-off.
Sure.
And now the subsequent generations of bass, and that was like, I don't know, 12 years ago or whatever.
Sure.
So now, or maybe even, at least 12, maybe 14. But anyways, since then, the bass have adopted different behavior because now a lot of them are eating crawdads and eating bugs, perch. Yeah, they've gotten away from the smelt. So
I heard it still can happen, just not as much.
Yeah, well, that North Basin. Plus, there was a lot more smallies in the North Basin back then. The population was greater.
Sure.
But it's still, we just knew the behaviors of what those fish did. And this was before forward-facing sonar.
Sure.
And we just knew, okay, if the wind's blowing from this direction and it's cloudy, we need to be here.
Yep.
If it's not blowing, if it's sunny, we need to do this. And it just didn't it just didn't happen like this. We'd go to the same tournament, which is held the same week every year, and every year we'd just learn a little bit more, and then we'd see the trends develop. Like, I remember this last year or the year before that they were doing the same thing, and then I mean we finally pieced it all together like in the last couple of years. Sure. And then all of a sudden all the smelt died, and then it just rewrote the blueprint of how to win tournaments there.
Sure.
Which Joe and I we have not won a tournament there since we won those. It's been like 2010 might have been the last one we won there. We've been very competitive.
Yep.
A couple of years we were very not competitive.
Sure.
But that was just so fun back then. It's still
a
fun.
Bucket list tournament for me. That'd be so fun. But with the COVID stuff, it hasn't been as easy to get up there now. But I have so many questions on that. Particularly, I want to talk a little bit about the marabou jig just because I think you know a little more about it. But first, smelt, right? So what I've learned about smelt is I like targeting them when it's cloudy. I don't really like or have as much success when it's sunny out. Have you kind of found the same situation?
I would agree with that. I would agree with that for sure. Yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I would agree with that one.
And the marabou jig seemed to be something where if it was sunny up there, you would probably fish that a little bit more. But
you would. And also with that is I'm still trying to figure that. I mean, I've thrown it a ton. I don't know. It seems like fish that just come off the spawn just like that bait up there. I haven't thrown it near. When I get into deep water, I don't throw it much. But when they're still shallow and they just come off the spawn, they just like it.
I'm probably letting one cat out of the bag that Ron Mayer won't appreciate, but I've heard it's a hell of a forward-facing sonar bait for what it's worth.
Yeah, it's.
Sorry, Ron.
I think any bait that they're going to bite is going to be a good forward
Facing
fishing.
That's a good point. Yeah, yeah.
Because if you can cast your bait to a fish you see,
And they eat it.
yeah,
Well, yeah.
yeah,
Well, they like a marabou jig, and I guess if you can get it in front of their face, you're probably gonna eat it, right?
right.
So,
yeah.
but the evolution of that jig, so it was kind of like a football jig scenario, but for smallmouth. And you said that Jeff Gustafson kind of turned you onto that.
Yeah, it was. Well, actually, I heard it from my tournament partner, Joe Thrun, but he heard it from Jeff because Joe fished a couple tournaments on Rainy Lake many years ago. So Joe fished with Jeff in a couple of those many years ago, and so Jeff put Joe onto that. But we were held to utter secrecy on that.
Yeah,
and
probably.
But now everybody knows about it. So this is the first time I've ever talked about it ever.
Well, I want, out of all respect for you, we can cut here, but it's pretty known.
Yeah,
pretty
no,
known
there's no
technique.
reason to cut it now because from West Coast to East Coast, everybody knows about it now, so it's not like it's a secret anymore. But yeah, it's back then. I mean, had we not heard it from Jeff, there was probably a couple situations up on Rainy Lake where we wouldn't have caught much.
Sure.
Because the fish were there.
Yep.
They wouldn't bite nothing. And when we pulled that out, they bit.
How the heck did you throw those things back then? Because you didn't have like the nice. Did you have nice braid to throw them on?
Threw it on. I still throw everything on fluorocarbon on spinning.
Really?
Yeah.
6 or
Back then I was throwing 8.
okay. Yep. I like 8-pound straight fluoro on a spinning reel. I agree with that.
And the reason why 8 is because up on Rainy, you got a lot of vegetation in that.
Yep.
So, including bulrushes. So, I'd much rather deal with a 4-pound smallie with 8-pound tests.
Yeah.
And gamma is what I like, which is I really like gamma.
Heard great things about it.
Yeah, it's solid.
Sure.
So, yeah. So if I get anywhere near bulrush with 8-pound, that's still dicey. In fact, I'll go. If I know I'm going to be throwing around a lot of stuff like that, I'll even have 10 on a hair jig.
God, that seems like tough to throw. Still,
well, it
though.
is, but those fish they're not that boat wary.
Well, the water's a little bit more tannicky, so to speak.
It's more tannicky. They're not as boat wary.
Don't need as far cast
because they're not pressured. So I don't need that super long cast like I've never fished Sturgeon Bay in the spring, but guys that tell me like the casting distance of your marabou jig there is like crucial.
My buddy and I developed a hair jig rod specifically because of that.
Okay.
I aside from like a Rainy or maybe a Vermilion or a river scenario, I think casting distance is everything with it, but I'm not that good a sight fisherman, so I like it as far away from me as possible, right? So, but that's so interesting to me. So this was like the 90s when that kind of
that the hair jig?
Yeah.
No, Gustafson probably put us onto that probably about 2006 or 7.
Sure.
Maybe 8, somewhere right in that time frame.
How long were them Canadians doing it before then?
Well, that's just it. Because there's a guy up there named Dave Lindsay. I think he was doing it, and his brother Norm. And
well, he's kind of credited for. He's kind of the big guy who. I think Bufflin was telling me that one time or something that there's a Lindsay that invented it or something.
Yeah, Dave and Norm Lindsay are brothers from up there.
Okay,
and as far as I know, that's as far back as I can track it. The development of that jig, too.
Yep.
Those guys. Not that I've made a big effort to track it any farther, but if I was, I've never had a conversation with Dave about that bait. So
cool conversation.
I know. In fact, next time I see him, when I fish that Rainy Lake tournament, that's when I see him.
Sure.
Next time I see him, I might have to ask him about that, just because I wonder if he is the originator of that, or how. Because I know it wasn't Jeff Jeff was put onto it by either them or somebody else up there.
Right.
But it was just a small group of people that was doing it back then. That's for sure. Back in 2007 or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can rest easy because we're about to the Canadian mob, Jim, this was his first time talking about it, so I can spare his life another day because he has kept it a secret.
As much as I wanted to make my own jig like that, have all-terrain tackle come out with one, which someday they might. I'm like, nope, they kept me to secrecy, and because it was a secret, but it's no longer a secret bait. So it's okay to talk about it now because I mean I've seen Jeff talk about it a million times. So it's like
I think you're good now.
Yeah,
yep. Outcast I think makes one. So yeah, I think you're good.
I think so.
Do you tie your own then?
Well, Jeff taught me.
Yep, that's a good.
He did.
The
it's
best
like,
guy to learn from.
We're up there at Rainy Lake for the tournament, which he fishes that same tournament.
Sure,
he does well there, and so he was the ones Joe had. Joe had gotten some from Jeff, I think.
Sure.
So I'm like, well, Jeff, how am I going to, I'm going to need some of my own someday.
Yep.
So he just sat out and he showed me, okay, you take that. I mean, it's pretty simple. It just takes for me, it takes me like an hour to tie one jig, which is really slow.
Same.
You too?
Oh, I'm like I said, if anyone asks to buy them from me, I'll be like, there's no way. Like,
well, I know.
I can hardly tie them for myself.
Mine, after I tie mine, it looks like a cat's been chewing on it. I mean, it's not pretty.
To me, it's all about how you prep the marabou. And you'd probably know better than me.
No, you prep the marabou?
It's how you...
I'm not kidding.
What?
I'm not kidding.
You don't prep it?
No.
What do you mean? You just freaking take a whole quill and you just... tie it on?
Well, no.
What about the stems?
Yeah, okay.
Can't get the stems in there.
Now I see what you're saying. Yeah, and Jeff
pick
told
out the seeds and stems.
Jeff taught me this. He said, you grab out your big chunk of marabou, and then he's like, okay, this part of it's shit, and he'd rip this off. This part of it's junk. Rip that off. He's like, okay, this is the section. This is what you want it to look like. And then he'd pick those off.
Yep.
Then you'd wrap that on your jig.
Yep.
And then you'd pick more off and wrap it on. Pick more off.
Yep.
And then, okay, the rest of this is junk. Throw it,
okay,
onto the next chunk of marabou to pick apart. So is that what you mean by prep?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, kind of. I may be a little more tedious. I'm gonna literally grab something and show you because I'm literally curious.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's see what you got there. Because I don't. Just imagine how many fish I would have caught if I'd prepped it the right way.
Oh God.
That's what I want to know.
Well, I'm not winning tournaments on it, but I like catching them on it. But so I'll prep them.
And then
like this.
I've seen a lot of people's own personal ties, and man, they look so much better. And they'll put tinsel in them and this and that. Mine are always just black or brown. I've tied some green.
That's all a guy needs.
I've tied some green pumpkin ones. I've tied some white colored ones. But the black and brown, it's hard to beat it. Okay, so you're
So you got a feather, right? So a full feather, right? I'll cut right down that stem, a bunch of these.
Okay.
And then basically I'll wrap that around the jig.
Let me get out these because I'll never see what you're doing.
No worries. So.
Okay, so that's what you wrap around the jig?
So basically I'll take that, on top of the jig head like so. And I'll take a bunch of these.
Yeah.
And that's how I'll do it because there's never a stem in there. And it just
there is a little stem there, though.
But that's not in the...
that's not in the trailing part behind the hook.
Correct.
I got you now.
That's the part that keeps the hair together for me to get it onto the jig is all.
Okay.
Yep.
You're doing a simpler approach than the way I do it.
Well, it takes a long time to prep that marabou is the big thing. So it's a matter of... that's how I've gotten as fast as if I do that beforehand, I can tie one in 20 to 30 minutes versus an hour.
Yeah,
is basically
because
I have the marabou prepped ahead of time. But I would much rather watch you or Gussie tie one.
Well, basically, you're using a little piece of the stem. I mean, I'm taking all that.
You're ripping it off,
ripping off of that stem.
Yep,
and then you got to keep it pinched, and then it's a pain in the butt to wrap it.
That's why I keep the stem on there.
Yeah, that would help with wrapping it, and I could see how you could do it quicker the way you do it, because it gets kind of unruly the way that I was taught. Maybe Jeff does it different nowadays too. Who knows?
I don't know.
But
it's amazing how touchy that is. If you don't have the right stuff on, it seems like that jig just doesn't breathe the same. But
yeah, I don't know. I always wonder about that.
But does it really matter?
That's what I'm getting at, because there's times where I'm like, that piece is good enough, and I tie it on there. And I honestly, I don't think I've ever had one particular marabou jig outperform another one.
Sure.
It's like they all seem to do about the same.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think less hair is better than too much? That's what I've found.
When I tie them up pretty fluffy.
Yep.
And but it doesn't take too long before they kind of rat out.
Sure. Yep.
And you still keep catching them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So and I've heard other people say that, man, the ratty ones are the best ones. So
sure.
And you know what? I can't say no, that could very possibly be. But I've also caught a lot of them on brand new, ones I've threw for the first time.
Yep.
So, but at some point, there you cross a line where there's not enough on there.
I would agree.
At some point.
Yep.
I don't know what point that is.
Yep. I don't either. Do you mess with your weight a lot, or do you pretty much only throw like one size?
I throw it in shallow water with a light head.
Yep.
And I probably need to start tying some with a heavier head, so I can start fishing it in 10 to 15. When I say shallow water, I'm saying like 7 feet and less.
Yep.
So and it's that slow fall that is so deadly. But I probably should start throwing it or tying a heavier head. I mean, I've got a few that are heavier. It's like when I get into that 10, 15 foot zone, then something clicks in my head that, I got to throw a drop shot or a little football head of some kind, or a finesse jig, which could be just a pre-biased mindset that I have that's not founded on anything, because maybe I should be throwing a little heavier hair jig. But it's something that's I think about all the time when I'm out there fishing that 10-foot zone, and I'm like, God, maybe I should try that heavier hair jig, and maybe I will.
Are you fishing Fort Francis this year?
Oh my God, no.
Okay.
I can't, because there's a Champions Tour tournament at the same time.
Sure.
So that's a hard decision to make, but in the career of being a bass fisher in my career, I chose the trail I chose the tournament that can potentially win more money.
Absolutely.
And the Fort Francis is one tournament. I love it. We got friends we've made up there. It's always fun to see them. But actually, that tournament's payout has gone down in the last few years, and to where now when I do it, I'm just doing it for fun, basically.
The exchange rate's gotten worse, I think, too.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know much about that.
Me either. Either 7 shilling or something.
Yeah. 'Cause it goes up and down, whatever. And then, but with the Champions Tour, I could probably win more money for the one tournament I'm doing, but then plus they got the championship at the end, and you're building points towards, and so there's a lot of greater potential there.
You almost locked down AOI last year for Champs Tour, and I think I read a stat. You've got 10 Champions Tour top 10s in only 4 years fishing.
I do.
Which is like, I did the math. There's only 3 regular season events a year, which would make 12. So you've taken a top 10 in the Champions Tour in 10 out of 12 regular season events, unless they're counting championships, which either way, that's just an insane stat that you are fairly automatically consistently cashing a good check there.
I haven't, I guess I never really looked at that.
I was just reading up on you for
first
this.
I've heard of it. But yeah, it's I don't know. It's when it comes to fishing catch, when the Champions Tour first came out, I actually struggled a little bit in some of their tournaments.
Me too.
I was just doing one-offs, you know.
Yep.
I just do this one, and then I do that one, not the whole season. Although I did get into one championship early on, but it was kind of I had to readjust to because so much of my over the years haven't fished nearly as many Minnesota tournaments in like the last 15 years or so, that I actually had to retune myself to catching fish out of Minnesota lakes.
I believe it.
And and that's also thinking about the numbers of fish, because with the Champions Tour, it's one of those circuits where it's every fish you catch is added to your total, because they're weighed in the boat by an official, and then the fish is released at boat side right where you're at. So, which is a little bit different format than traditionally. You catch 5, put them in your live well, and you bring them to a weigh-in at the end of the day. So you're only having to worry about catching 5 big ones.
I'd say you adjusted nicely, though.
Well, it's a work in progress, that's for sure. You know, at the end of this year, I look back, I'm like, dang, you know, if I could only because with the Champions Tour, you do a morning session and an afternoon session.
Yep.
And I never can have a good morning session and a good afternoon session.
It's only happened once to me.
It's like it's like I'll just struggle and one of those sessions, and the other one I'll just crush. And it'll put me in a top 10, but the wins are I still haven't won a Champions Tour. I've come within one fish several times now.
I was close once, and that was this year on Gull.
On Gull?
This year on Gull, yeah.
You were leading that in the morning session, weren't you?
I was in second after the morning session. I was leading with a half hour left, and Noah
you
got on them docks.
You got Noah-fied.
I got Noah-fied, all right. And I was doing what I had them going 3 different ways that event, and it seems like that Champions Tour, man, it's like you really need to have a lot of options, it seems like. I don't know. That was the one tournament where I had a lot of options, and I kept my mind open, and I kind of let the fish tell me what to do. And I fished. I had a little something figured out in the offshore deal. Like, I could make offshore fish bite, and everyone was complaining about that. But
that was one of those.
I had a good dock bite going, and I had a good mid-range bite going if the clouds came in too. But I didn't think my offshore program wasn't that good. You saw the weights. Like, the weights weren't. Like, if the offshore bite was going on Gull, you'd see probably over 100 pounds if it was going.
It was the wrong. I think if the main lake was the afternoon session. I'm thinking if that would have been the morning session, we might have done better on that part of the lake.
I think so too.
So that's just how they formatted that tournament.
I had one, and that's just how it goes. I was just fortunate. I had offshore fish that other people hadn't. I couldn't believe it in the morning when I got into Wilson Bay, because there were so many fish on this.
Well, that was the morning. That was part of the morning session.
Yep. And
so you fished that part of the, because the way they divided it was in the morning session you could fish the little lakes up north or Wilsons or steamboats. Then the afternoon session was main lake Gull.
Yep.
So you fished the Wilson steamboat part of the program.
Wilson. I'm not a big steamboat guy.
Okay, just Wilson.
But I had 2 schools of fish in Wilson and some dock fish.
Yeah.
But I had seen guys practicing around that stuff, so I was like, there's no way I'm going to get. I have one school I think I'm going to get because I don't think anyone found it, but the one school I wanted to start on, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do if there's 3 boats here, you know? And no one was there. And I really think, after fishing all of those Champs Tour events, the only one I've done good in, I got a good start and I got good momentum going early.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I think is really a big deal with the Champions Tour's momentum, because I got positive momentum rolling and I was able to keep it rolling, versus on all the other events, I did not have momentum. It seemed like I was clawing for.
Well, you gotta get over that.
I know, right?
You do.
Well,
because
it's a mental. I'm a mental basket case for that deal, and such a learning experience.
Yeah,
it's been.
Yeah, you do got to get over that, because that second half counts equally to the first half.
It does.
And a lot of times they put us in different sections of the lake for the second half, and plus you're in a different time of day, so a lot different could be going on, and all of a sudden you might get it clicking. So.
Well, that happened for me on Minnetonka last year. I was probably 35th going into the second half, and I had a good boat draw going out.
You mean 2 years ago?
2 years ago. Yep, not last year, but the year before
that.
I
didn't fish it I didn't fish that Champions Tour 2 years ago.
Man, I was so far back, and I ended up in Crystal Bay pulling out onto more of a current spot, and I had all 50 guys running by me putting water on the spot, and that second half I'd really charged up. So it is crazy how fast things can change with that tour, but it seems to mentally spin a lot of guys out, myself included, at certain times. And I guess you've fished enough events where I'd say you probably are pretty mentally sound nowadays.
Not always. Not always.
How would you describe that side of the sport, and I guess the voodoo with it? And there's some voodoo to the mental side of the sport.
I was. Well, I had that at the Champions Tour Championship on Serpent Lake this year. I mean, I was so bummed out at halftime because it's a 25 boat championship.
Yep.
And I believe I was in 24th place or 23rd, it was 22nd, 23rd, or 24th.
I was probably in 25th. So,
yeah.
Yep, or 24th or something. Yep.
And I was so disgusted because the smallies I chased after, and I knew they were to me it was a sucker's play to go for them, but they sucked me in anyways, and I couldn't catch them.
I couldn't catch them.
And
it was brutal.
So, I mean, I caught what I think I had like 7 pounds or something like that in the morning session, and I was totally beat, and really, I had a good second session, and made it up to 7th, which they paid down. They paid I don't know 10th or 14th or whatever. So I got a check. But I had a good afternoon session, and despite just knowing that I was beat, I was just kind of like, my mind, I'm like, just screw it, I'm just gonna go fish shallow and just see what happens. And I'm like, the one thing I told myself, whatever you do, I'm not gonna take another look at a weed line fish out here the rest of the day.
Sure.
Because that's where I was, and that's what beat me in the morning.
It was brutal.
Those deep fish, and you could see them on your forward-facing sonar. With me, it's active target.
Yep.
You could see them out there. You could see them come up and look at your baits. Then they'd fade away, and then another one come up, look at your bait, and fade away. Then I'd pick up a different lure and repeat. Without putting any fish in the boat. And after 4 hours of that morning session, I had like 7 pounds or whatever, and almost. I mean, still had a chance to win, but at that point, you're looking at like probably a 3% chance of winning the tournament.
Right. Well, props to you for battling back, dude, because it's tough to do. And
the only reason why it happened was, I recognized that I could not do it. I mean, I could not do it on the weed line, even though there are fish out there.
Yep.
And the rock piles with the smalls. There's no way I'm going to do it. I've proven it all morning that I can't do it. And I know there's some fish up in the shallower weeds, and maybe if I, just fish, and hopefully run into them.
Yep.
And that's what happened. I just got up shallow. The shallow fish were willing to bite.
Yep. The deep fish weren't. Not in the afternoon.
No, they were.
Well, I died out there.
Yeah.
Yep.
And everybody else that I talked to that was out there, same thing. So, with the fish, and I didn't like completely smoke them in the afternoon, but
no one did.
It was
really.
so tough.
It was.
And so I saw myself just climbing with each shallow fish I'd catch. I'm like, move up another place.
Yep.
Move up another place. And then pretty soon I'm in the top 10, and then finished 7th. And just another fish would have got me up to 5th.
Right.
And into some, a couple more $1,000 in payout.
Yep.
I had the bite. I had the fish hooked, a couple of fish hooked that afternoon session that would have got me into 5th. But, you can't put all of them. Can't put all of them in the boat. At least I can't.
No, I can't
although,
either.
Although I did have a turn. Were you at the championship on Bay Lake a few years ago?
I was not. Nope,
Yeah.
I hadn't fished it then yet.
I went 27 for 27.
Nice.
On that tournament.
Oh.
I couldn't believe it, but I didn't even think. I think I just missed a check in that tournament, just
Sure.
barely. Yeah.
Yeah, Nolan won that one too.
Yeah, I know.
How about that guy?
I know.
Well, I have respect for him. He's what's cool about him, I've said this before on the podcast, but he's won sitting on a deep hole on Bay Lake. He's won throwing an A-rig and a square bill for smallmouth. And he's won fishing docks. I mean, there really hasn't been a way that I can think of that he hasn't won an event. So I guess it's just weird how guys seem to have that sense for it. And
Yeah.
it's a weird sport that way, but hats off to that guy. It's been insane fishing against him.
His fishing ability sure has earned my respect. That's for sure. In fact, my prediction to win Serpent Lake was Noah. I predicted me, but just because you have to.
Yep. Well, yeah, you got to bet on yourself.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. I put I invest all that time and money into this tournament trail betting on myself. So
Right.
I got to protect myself, but it was Noah. I'm like, he just won Gull. It seems like he knows the northern lakes really good, and and when they get out on those deeper edges or in those deeper weeds, or even if that's not where he just knows what he needs to do and how to catch them.
Yeah, it's been cool fishing against them and you. I think you had finished second in AOI last year though with that event.
Second in AOI, yeah.
Dude, that's pretty cool. I was talking to Newman before the season started, and he had an interesting point that he made talking to you about that format and kind of how you visualize that format, I guess. And
what did I say? I want to know.
Well, you had mentioned it kind of was challenging right away, but Newman had said, I'm probably butchering this, but you had kind of said that it clicked for you a little bit on like how you approach it and what you need to do. You don't need to catch how it's not just a small fish format, but it's not a big fish format. It's, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I do. Because I've made this point to many other people. It's not. There's not enough big fish in a lake to make it a big fish format.
Yep.
So you gotta just target where the biggest population of fish are hanging, which means, and I'm not talking the 12 inches either.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, if I can find a good 2-pound pattern, that's gonna put me in a good position. And that's because there's still a lot of 2-pounders in the lake.
Yep.
So when you catch a fish, you're not just weighing a 1-pound. Because in the Champions Tour, it's a 1-pound minimum for that tournament. So with a 2-pounder, you're catching a decent-sized fish. And plus, if you're on a 2-pounder pattern, that means you're going to catch a few 3-pounders.
Yep, maybe a 4.
Yeah. And then you might get in a situation where all of a sudden you catch 4 or 5 1-pounders right in a row that just, happen to be hanging out where you're at. So that's and then of course I'm not using giant glide baits to catch these fish either.
Right.
Staying with pretty simple tactics,
Yep.
basic tactics. I think that's in Minnesota you can catch tons of fish just fishing the basics.
I would agree with that. John
Yeah.
Figge kind of is a guy who kind of keeps things simple and keeps it that way, and I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. To catch bass in Minnesota, it's pretty simple. I mean, you don't have to. There's not a lot of complexity to it, but I hate to say that because
It's getting harder.
but you can definitely do the wrong thing at the
Right.
wrong time and
Yep.
not catch them. So
Yep. I think it's gotten harder. I think it's gotten harder than it was. It seems like you can't catch 30 out of a school like you used to.
dude,
It's-
I caught 40 out of a school in Clearwater Lake in
but
Annandale.
unless you're Jim Moynagh.
No.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's one of the biggest schools of bass I've ever run into in Minnesota lakes.
Yeah.
It was
Clearwater's fun.
Yeah, and I hadn't been there for years, and so we were there again for a photo shoot for Blackfish.
Yep.
Or was it All Terrain? One of the, I don't know, one of the two. But anyways, so, there's only so many cameramen, so it's right away in the morning. I got this camera in my boat, and I'm like, okay, where am I going to go? Because I've been there for years.
Yep, it's a maze. I mean,
Yeah.
there's lots to do.
So I'm like, all right, well, I'll just go over to this inside turn over here for whatever.
Yep.
Move the
It's
boat.
a good turn lake.
Yeah, move the boat about, I don't know, 25 yards, and all of a sudden, I had one on my all-terrain jig, and I felt one pop it. Didn't hook them, threw in there again, popped it again, threw in there, caught one, threw in there again, caught one, and then threw in there a few more times and pop, but no fish. And then I switched to a worm, and then I just started catching them, just boom, 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 boom. Not that but these were small. These are like 1.5 to 2.5 pounders.
Yep.
So that size range, if they're not hot fish, they may not go for a jig, because I was throwing a big jig.
Yep.
So just going to a smaller worm, that size range of fish is like, okay, I can handle that. And
Right.
Yeah, so it was just turned into one after another.
Sure.
For about the first 25.
That's fun.
And then the second 15, I probably spent 3 times as much time there to catch the second 15.
Usually how it works.
Yeah,
Yep.
especially the last couple, because when I was getting close to 40, I'm like, I don't think I've ever caught 40 out of one school in Minnesota.
What?
So no.
Never?
No.
Surprises
So
me.
I'm like, I'm going to stay here till I get 40. And so those last couple literally took like, I don't know, 40 minutes or so without moving the boat. Just finally caught them.
Had to get there.
Yeah, and then I hit 40. I'm like, okay.
All right, let's go.
I gotta go find the next 40 fish school.
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, those schools, I mean, props to you. Those schools are less and less out there. It used to seem like there was more of them. But
Yeah, well, what size schools are you getting on? You sound like 40 is nothing.
I'm probably exaggerating, but no, certain lakes like Pelican, when we went up there for Champions Tour in practice, it was like they'd set the hooks on themselves for 50 of them.
That killed me that I couldn't do that tournament.
Oh, my
That
gosh.
killed me. I wanted to go there so bad, but couldn't make it.
Mille Lacs pre-spawn would be another time where I've caught over 40.
Really?
Yep. That's stupid
Wow.
fun when
Wow.
you get but it's not like all the time. There's a couple dirty water lakes that when they first get done spawning and they get out on the rocks out here
Yeah.
on the right day, it's happened in a couple lakes around here. But it's not. I'm not saying it's often, Jim. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yep. I haven't caught 40 in a school.
Well,
on
I felt
Clearwater.
like a lesser of a fisherman there for a second.
No, Jim, trust me, you're a freaking legend in my book, and I guess if you caught 40, I probably caught 30. So.
See, that's how fragile my confidence and ego are regarding fishing. For example, it doesn't take much chatter at the pre-tournament meetings for me to think to myself, well, God, I'm not catching crap compared to what I'm hearing over here, you know?
I tune that crap out, man. I hate listening to that.
I need to tune it out, but sometimes you just overhear things, and it's like, oh my God, I suck so bad on this lake. And then, of course, the person you overheard, they come in and they got less than you when it actually comes time to count the chips.
The best practices I have are not my best tournaments. That's all I know.
That happens.
It's so frustrating because you feel so prepared mentally to go do it, and you feel like, well, we're not going to suck today. Like those good when you have those really good practices, you could say, well, if there's one thing we're going to do today, it's not suck.
Yeah.
We know too much, and those are the tournaments where it just seems like when you think you got it figured out.
Yeah, that is so true. Those good practices don't always equate to good tournaments, and usually what you need to change, what happens to change that is a weather change. Is usually behind all that. Usually,
for sure, the lack of wind on Vermilion would be a prime example for me.
In this year's tournament,
I had the adjustment ready to go.
Yeah.
With the hair jig.
Yeah.
And I had mechanical failure after mechanical failure with the hair jig. So it was like I had a really good crankbait bite going into that event.
Yeah.
That was, if you'd have said that we were going to suck, I'd have said, no, I'll pick up a hair jig and we're not going to suck. And I pick up the hair jig, I'd throw my leader off and pick up the hair jig and get the leader knot wrapped in my stripper guide and all frayed up, and I just had problem after problem that event, and so it just everything that I said couldn't have happened happens, and that's why it's such a humbling sport, and I try to never get real cocky with it because of that.
Yeah, that's I've had bad tournaments after some just so extremely good tournaments. It's just like the Rainy Lake comes to mind. So some of the worst finishes we've had there were after just phenomenal practices and the weather changes, and this was more in the earlier days before we knew how to adjust to some of those changes.
Yep.
But even though, I mean, that's just that whole history of what we've done there. I could go on all day for that, but anyways, but even just there's times I'm in Minnetonka where I just everywhere I go there'd be nice quality fish, and then the tournament comes up and it just becomes you just scrap, fish for scraps.
Yep.
So that happens, but then sometimes those good practices do turn into good tournaments.
They do. It seems like when you're just sniffing onto something, when you're just kind of starting. I really probably think this maybe applies to your multi-day events more than anything. We've noticed it on the Elite Series and stuff. It seems like those guys, they just start to get onto it that last day of practice, and then they develop that pattern throughout the tournament versus having the pattern and running that pattern throughout the tournament. They're kind of just getting a sniff of that pattern and then building on it that next 3 or 4 days, however long that event is.
Yeah.
We don't fish enough multi-day events, up where I'm from to really, I guess, have that aspect of it. But I guess there's so many aspects to it. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, having multiple day events, that's when a fisherman can really learn a lot.
I believe it.
Because in practice, what we have to do is we find the fish, then we got to leave them. Then we might find some more fish, then we got to leave those. And then if you have a one-day tournament, well, then you hit some of those spots where you found them, and then you're done. In a multi-day tournament, you fish a few days of practice, and you see what works, what's not working, and then first day of the tournament, you see what's working, what's not working again, and then you get to then as the weather changes, water level changes, whatever, you're on the same body of water with the same fish, and you get to see how things progress as each day comes and goes. Each day comes and goes. You get to see how this happens. So I've always, with FLW, forever they did it. Their format was the full field fishes 2 days, cut down the field to just a narrow group of guys on day 3, and then even more narrow on day 4.
Yep.
So I always advocated for everybody to fish on day 3,
right?
Because I loved having that extra day to just further learn what I'm trying to learn.
Yep.
And which I didn't always work out, but there was one season where they did that, where everybody got to fish day 3. It was 2010. And I made they had 6 for most years. FLW had 6 regular season tournaments in their tour.
Yep.
And that 2010 season, if it wasn't for that third day, I think I would have cashed 1 check out of the 6. But instead, it was either 5 or 6 checks I cashed in that season because I pulled myself from a horrible day 1.
Yep.
Figure something out on day 2, and then had the opportunity on day 3 to finally get up into the money. So
that's so crazy. Like, fishing multi-day events is crazy. Do you feel like practice? You have to practice different for those than a single day?
Yeah.
Like, is it more like a champs tour where you feel like you need to find more stuff, or you?
Well, you just want to. We'll see. With the MLF Pro Circuit the last couple of years, they only gave us 2 days to practice, and you're talking.
Pretty big water,
60,000 acres of water or more most of the time. It's like you got 2 days. So
right.
You just I just would kind of like what you were saying a minute ago with elites. You just kind of go out and try to get just try to get hunch. You're trying to get hunches of things.
Yep.
Like, oh, I just caught one on this dock. Well, there's 10 more docks here, and maybe I'll fish those 10 more, or maybe I won't. But let's say I do. Well, then there's 10 more docks over there. Well, I ain't going to touch them. It may not touch another dock anywhere.
Right.
In any time.
Yep.
Because now I know, okay, I caught some fish on these docks, but I got to check,
Yep.
Okay, instead of just hammering more docks, maybe it's time. Or, okay, these were flat. These were on flat shorelines where I caught these fish.
Right.
Let's try these ones on these bluffs over here.
Deep. Yep.
Yeah.
Deeper, steeper break. Yep.
So maybe, try to get some inkling as to what type of dock they want to hang on. But then you have to, I don't know, you just try to gather just some clues and then try to make it work on the tournament day.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
And I was terrified because they went to 2 days of practice, restricted to 2 days of practice. They went to that 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, it had been 4. And I hadn't made qualified for the championship for like 3 years. And so now when they restricted it to 2 days, I'm like, oh my God, how am I ever going to do this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't make it to the championship on 4 days of practice. I can't learn enough in 4 days. How am I going to do it in 2 now?
Right.
I mean, I feel like I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, then what did I think? This is out of 160 boat field. So then the
season, this past one.
Yeah. So then the first year of the 2 days of practice, I finished 27th in the points, and then the next year 25th, and then this most recent year was 25th again in the points.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and these are like 160 boat fields. So I'm
you
like,
got a lot of top 40s,
So-
a couple top 30s, top 20.
yeah. So it's like, well, apparently the 2 days of practice limitation works for me to some degree. I mean, I didn't win. The problem was I wasn't getting any top 10s either at the same time at that level.
Yeah, and it's.
I mean, I was cashing checks, but
You got 160 guys, man, and a lot of them are from the south or from, where you're going.
yeah.
And man, it's those are good finishes, I guess. But I hear you.
They were good. Yeah, I was happy with those finishes. Anytime at that level I make a check, a lot depends on, I can't just say what I was about to say. I can't say because I was going to say anytime I make a check, I'm happy. That is not the case because it depends how I get to that check.
Sure. Right.
If I'm leading the tournament after 2 days and then I get to a 40th place check in the end, no,
Kind of a kick in the dick.
I am not happy.
Right.
But after, if I start in 100th place after day 1 and move up to that 40th place, well, yeah, then I'm really happy. So kind of each finish comes in its own context, I guess.
Right. Well, I did want to touch on this. I do have to pee at some point, but you almost won FLW Angler of the Year on the pro circuit twice.
2 times, yeah.
2006 and 2012, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that sounds right, yeah.
You almost tasted, you could taste that. Angler of the Year is something a lot of anglers would say they'd rather win a classic or whatever. To me, the Angler of the Year is such a prized deal because it requires consistency. It requires you to not suck. It requires you to be the best overall in terms of that. To me is what I'd want to win is the Angler of the Year. So
Yeah.
what was that like? And I mean, walk us through that a little bit.
Well, let's start with the 2006.
We had an 8th on Lewis Smith, a 29th at Logan Martin, 49th at Champlain, an 8th at Kentucky Lake, 29th at Beaver, and a 2nd at Pickwick. And I probably missed some.
Yeah, that
Hell of a season.
I remember, I think Lake Champlain was the last, well, I know it was. Lake Champlain was the last tournament, Northern Natural Lake. And I was sitting behind Anthony Gagliardi, who fishes on the Bass Pro Tour now. He was the one guy ahead of me. And so I felt good going into it.
Yep.
Northern Natural Lake. What
Yep.
the heck? Let's roll. Let's roll.
Yep.
But God, I can't remember where I fished in that tournament. I mean, I think I was fishing betting smallmouth that tournament, but whatever. I remember I got a check, like a 40th, or I don't know if you got it written down there, but
49th.
49th, yeah. And I think if I would have had a top 10, I would have won that Angler of the Year, but I didn't.
Sure.
And then the other one, 2012, ironically or coincidentally, again, I was going into the last tournament. It was Lake Champlain. I was in second place in the AOY going into that tournament.
Yep.
1 point behind the leader, David Dudley. 1 point. And I'll never forget, this is my biggest wrong decision I've ever made in tournament fishing.
Sure.
Because of what was at stake, Angler of
Right.
the Year. So all night before the tournament, first day of the tournament, all night I didn't sleep because I was thinking about, do I go to place X or do I go to place Y?
Yep. It was burning you inside.
And I was just all night I was thinking about this and never slept a wink. Got up, go to place Y or place X. And half the day goes by. I got 11 pounds, which is nothing on Lake Champlain.
No, it's not.
So now I'm like, okay, it's a bit of a drive, but let's go to place Y. Go to place Y. David Dudley sitting exactly on the waypoint.
No.
He
No.
weighs in 24 pounds. Off of
No.
24 pounds off of that spot.
Oh.
And when I first saw him there, when I first rolled up and saw that was him there, I was just like, there's no way I can win Angler of the Year at this point. No way. I mean, yes, there was still a way, but I was mentally, that just shot me right out of the sky because because it's just to see. I mean, I'm like, I got to be fishing there, not him.
Right.
And he weighs this huge bag of largemouth there.
That'll make a guy sick to
Oh
his
my
stomach.
God. Yeah. That was brutal. So then, of course, so I ended up I called a couple more times that day, but had a weak bag, and he was leading, and it was pretty much decided at that point who was going to be the Angler of the Year,
Right.
because
Right.
position 3 and 4 wasn't too much further behind David and I going into it. So if David would have sucked too, well, one of these other guys would have, because I think, what did I finish, like 3rd or 4th that year in the Angler AOY?
Yeah, I think. I mean, that one.
I think I finished 3rd that year because Jacob Prosnick might have been 2nd, and then I was 3rd, I believe.
It was a devastating blow, if I remember right.
Yeah. Oh, that was terrible. When that was
I can't imagine.
that just, and a Northern Natural Lake of all places.
Right. Right. So now, do you have like a David Dudley poster at home with like a target on his head that you throw darts at before you go to the event? Or
No.
hate
No.
that David Dudley guy. Hate
No.
that Bob Barker.
No, he's always said hi to me. He's always been nice to me before then, after then. So I don't.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, you're a classy guy. You probably shook his hand.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe.
I can't remember.
Not that time.
I don't remember, but probably. I don't know.
Oh my gosh. That dude, I feel sick just hearing that story. I mean, I hope you mentioned your memory's not what it used to be. I hate to bring it back up, but I hope you're able to forget that one again. And I guess for me, it's sometimes those things like burn like a brighter fire or a deeper fire
that was
under
a,
you.
That was a laying there in bed at that night. To me, my career was on an inflection point. It's like my career could have gone like this if I would take Angler of the Year,
Yep.
or it could stay flat.
Yep.
It wasn't going to go any worse, or it could have done this with that title.
Yep.
And
would have done a lot.
It would have meant a lot for several. I mean, this is how.
That's how it goes.
This is how maybe it snowballed. I might be, had I won that, I might be fishing the Bass Pro Tour right now.
Totally, man.
And the reason why is because when the Bass Pro Tour was formed, first of all, they took most of their roster from the elites.
Yep.
But then they handpicked a few guys out of FLW.
Yep.
So I don't know. An angle a year on my resume would have been nice, and maybe they would have considered taking me. But see, even after they.
But just for sponsors, I mean, you look at guys who win a classic, guys who win a Forrest Wood Cup. I mean, what it does for their careers, that one moment, single-handedly. I mean, look at Hank Cherry. Look at, a lot of these, not Bobby Lane, but Chris Lane. That Randy Howell. That classic or that one, moment.
Right.
They rode that defined their career, and it propelled them up to a more profitable level, just to put it bluntly.
Because I knew I was on the doorstep of another level.
Right.
I mean, it was right there.
Oh, it was spot Y. You could taste it.
Yeah, and but here I am. I'm fishing the purgatory of Bass Pro tournaments, fishing the MLF invitationals because they're not money makers. And I joke, but it is kind of the bass fishing purgatory, meaning you have to go through this to get to the promised land of the Bass Pro Tour, or if you're fishing the old Bass Open is the same thing. That's the purgatory of pro bass tournament fishing. You have to just battle through that.
Yep.
It's financially just freaking carnage everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then, but if you get to the elites, that's the promised land. You're there. You're there. You've made it. You've got good traction in this sport.
Yep.
At that point. So, but here I am grinding away in the MLF invitationals. Financial risk is real, and it's certainly not where I want to be because the FLW Tour at the time was considered top level, along with the Bassmaster, kind of level.
Yep.
And to now be at an underling level circuit,
right.
It just doesn't sit well with me at all.
Well, I think we all know your abilities, Jim, and I guess I hope you know what you've got for abilities and what you've done. And I think I guess what I'm saying is I think you got some unfinished business.
Well, I do. I absolutely do. And here's back to what I was talking about when Bass Pro Tour made their initial roster.
Mm-hmm.
So they handpicked a few guys out of the FLW Tour, and I have no complaints who they picked.
Mm-hmm.
Andy Morgan, Brian Thrift,
pretty good.
Dudley. I mean, my resume, even if I had that AOY on my resume, their resumes were still better.
I mean, they're some of the best resumes come out of that tour.
Right. But so when the elites was gutted, well, they had to go handpick people.
Yep.
And I made it known to them that I'm interested.
Yep.
Okay. I never got a call, never got an invitation. And had I had that AOY on my resume, I think I don't think they could have ignored it.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree.
So that's how critical that one tournament in 2012 and choosing place X instead of place Y. That's how that snowballed into where I am now.
Well, it's not to keep things sour, but it's a game of decisions, right?
Yeah.
You just said it about as sad as I could ever hear it. That it's a game of decisions, and
it was a decision. And thinking about it all night long just clouded that decision more and more to where in the morning, a lot of mornings I don't know where I'm going, but I certainly, looking back on it, it's so apparent that it's so apparent. Just looking back at it, just strictly from a strategic fishing side of it, obviously spot Y was the way to go, and just being caught up in just, I don't know, I was just choked, I guess. Choke would be the word. Really choked on that one.
I feel like that's something that's easy to do, and I feel like I struggle with the same things where, we work so hard and we spend so much time on what we do that we feel like it's something that, we can force or we can just do. And it's hard to just let it happen sometimes for me, and just let your gut just let yourself kind of naturally fish, let your body and your brain and let you do what you've trained yourself to do for however long you've been doing it. That to me is hard for me to do sometimes. Can you relate with that, with like letting it be? And if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. If it's not, it's not. And just going and fishing.
You're talking about just going fishing, feeling loosey-goosey, just not feeling any weight on your shoulders, of pressure to perform.
Yep.
So you're feeling that versus thinking to yourself every second, God, I have to catch a fish right now. I have to, I have to finish in the top 5 in this tournament. I have to. And I'm going to. Well, either way you want to believe you are, but just having that weight of, I have to get in the top 5. I have to catch a fish this minute, this cast. Mm-hmm. And I know if I'm going to fish this bait, this is the bait. I know this is going to get me a big limit. This bait right here. I just know if I throw this enough, it's going to happen. Where you just pin yourself into a bad spot with that kind of mentality. Whereas if you fish more loosey-goosey, you're starting to fish more by intuition. Mm-hmm. And more like let's take dock fishing for example. Again, if I'm in that mode where, gosh, I have to catch one, I catch them this way all the time. I know this is how my big limit's going to come. So you fish this dock, nothing. This dock, nothing. This dock, nothing. This dock, nothing. But you still are thinking, oh, this is how it's got to be done. Then, oh, there's a bunch of docks over there. This is how it's got to be done. All of a sudden you got nothing. Whereas if you're fishing loosey-goosey, it's like, okay, you'll try those few docks. Like, oh, what's that out there? You might see something on the map, huh? Or you might, there might just be a hunch, like, oh, I need to go check that out over there. Even though there's not a dock over there.
Yep.
That's, I've seen something like that work before.
Right.
So you go over there and all of a sudden you catch 2-3 fish.
Yep.
That's the loosey-goosey kind of mentality. But you got it. And I'm not saying you want to be completely freaking, over the rainbow with that mentality, but just having that I guess it comes down to listening to that intuition that you might have, where, hey, I've seen this before, I better go try it. Mm-hmm. So, instead of just locking yourself into a certain doctrine of how you think it should have to be done.
Yeah. That leads me into kind of a weird question. You fished like against a lot of people on tour and stuff. Do you have anybody that like practices like Eastern meditation or like anything like that kind of stuff before an event? Like Rick Clunn's the closest guy I've seen to like I meditate before an event type of guy.
I think a lot of guys meditate without even knowing they're meditating. I
agree with that.
They don't call it meditation.
Right.
They don't call it meditation. That's just what they're doing.
Yep.
And it's just, you get in your own world and you get in your own thoughts and, you just go about it. But it's not any sort of formal meditation,
right,
by any means. I know there's some guys that have, hired sports psychologists and that. That ruined me for a couple of years, so
really
I got away from it. I didn't hire anybody.
Yep.
But this would have been like in the early 2000s. I started reading some stuff on sports psychology.
Yep.
And I don't know. It made me worse, if anything.
Sure.
But I don't even know if I can. My performance may have nothing to do with what I read. It might have been just I was going to suck in those tournaments anyways. But
maybe.
But I finally realized that. You know what? This stuff I'm reading, I'm already doing this stuff. I already know. I'm already doing this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just need to put I'm looking for help from from a book on psychology. When that's not where I need the help. The help is just believe. I just need to believe in. I just got to have the confidence to go get it done.
Believe in yourself. Self-belief.
Yeah, self-belief, and
It's hard to do in a losing ass sport.
Yeah, and
You know?
yeah,
I struggle with that.
yeah. Well, the thing I mentioned this earlier, is I do have a weak, fragile confidence level sometimes,
Sure.
and that can, I don't know why, but I'm just not the rock that I wish I was in some cases. Because sometimes, I mean, there's times where I'm just not feeling good about how I'm fishing. I'm not feeling competitive, and that's not a good place to be for very long.
No, and I think everybody can relate with that when you say it.
But for me, it could take one bad day in the water, and it can knock me from way up here. Now I'm thinking, I'm really crushing it these days, and then all of a sudden one bad turn, I'm like, oh God, I never catch them. That's sort of a mentality. It's like,
well, you've been beaten down by the sport. It's almost like one of those things where that guy without anything in his brain, right? There's nothing in this guy's brain. It's a blank slate in there, right?
who's this guy?
Well, it's Noah Schultz, whoever it is, right? They don't know any different. They just go, right? And they do it because they don't have any of that, like, trauma or, anything like that in their brain. So to me, it's easier for a guy like that to focus versus I'm a very active brain type of guy, and I think there's always stuff going on up there, and that stuff can sabotage you. It seems like we're our own worst enemies that way. But I guess with you've got unfinished business on the tour. Is there anything you're looking at that's like you feel you need to improve upon in your game, or what do you think you need to do to elevate yourself to kind of get that done? Because it's a changing world. You've got technology, but you've got guys like John Cox having success. There's not really a right answer in terms of how you need to fish.
Yeah. What I always tell people is, I tell them a lot of things, but when it comes down to being successful at tournament fishing, it comes down to what you know and how much you know, and then how you apply that. So if you don't know anything, you're not going to do very good. Okay?
Yeah.
But if you know, there's what there is to learn in fishing is endless. So the more of what you know, whether it's general principles of how to fish a football jig, or whether it's details of a certain rock ledge on a certain lake, just everything that you know, the more you know, and that's a benefit. But you also have to be able to process that into a strategy through something you formulate in practice.
Yep.
And then taking what you learn and come to know in practice, and then moving that forward into the competition.
I feel like you just described Jacob Wheeler.
I am describing Jacob Wheeler, because I think what we're dealing with, and some of these guys that are at the top of their game, early this year, I'm not much of a chess player.
Sure. It's fun.
But something that popped up in my YouTube feed was something about Magnus Carlsen, the world champion chess player. And I watched him play like 7 Grandmaster champions all at one time, and he played blindfolded.
What?
Yes, he played. So there's a Grandmaster at this table with a chessboard.
Yep.
A Grandmaster at this table, the chessboard. He played these guys blindfolded, but the positions, when the opponent would make a move,
yep,
he'd be told, this pawn to whatever square.
Queen to L7 or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but he was able to remember on all these different boards the exact positioning of all the pieces. He won every game. And I'm like, how do you... if there's
a guy from Good Will Hunting.
Yeah. If there's guys, if there's guys with half of this, intellectual capacity fishing in bass tournaments. How can I compete with that sort of processing of information and memorization and just how? If there's minds like that, if that's what I'm fishing against with Jacob Wheeler, if Jacob Wheeler has that kind of a mind, how can I ever beat this guy?
I don't disagree. However, I think chess is a little bit scientific to the point of like mathematically there's a way to win every game. Fishing is, I agree with you 100% on this. So, but fishing, the only thing is there's a little more nuance to it. It seems like, or is there? Or do you think?
I don't know enough about chess. No, I just know.
I don't know about fishing or chess to know like the answer. But
I was just blown away by the mind that is behind playing chess at that level.
Absolutely.
And
attention, all smallmouth anglers. Have you thrown the marabou jig? Have you thrown the hair jig? Well, if you have, you're going to want to listen right now. This podcast is brought to you by Veselka Fishing and Customs, a custom rod shop based out of Minnesota, and he has developed the answer, folks. What if I told you you could throw that marabou jig 30 to 50% further than you're casting it right now? Well, Dane, Mr. Veselka himself, has developed the answer. It's a custom 8-foot hair jig rod developed on a steelhead fly blank. He's put custom fly guides on this, so you're really going to be able to outcast the competition, catch more smallmouth. They aren't going to see you. What more do you need? Here's what I need you to do right now. Visit veselkafishing.com. That's VOCELKA fishing.com. This is the 8-foot hair jig rod, but this guy can build you anything you want. If you can dream it, he can do it. This episode is brought to you by just north of Memphis Barbecue. This is World Champion Barbecue. If you smoke meat and you don't like good barbecue, I do not know what to tell you right now besides you need to try some of this stuff. They've got their rub. They've got their sauces right on their website. They've got their famous dry rub award-winning seasoning that you could put on ribs, brisket, pulled pork, chicken, wings, anything you like to put on the smoker, on the oven, on the grill, any meat you like to cook, you need some of this dry rub seasoning in your life. But don't forget the sauce, because that's award-winning world champion sauce here. No matter what flavor you like, they've got 3 different sauces, and they are all good. You can drink them straight out the bottle. We've got Sweet Christie's for all you sweet-loving barbecue folk. We've got Christie's Mischief for all you spicy bass anglers out there. And then we've got Christie's Gold. And they'll sell all 3 of them in a combo. But you need to go to their website right now. It's jnomemphis.com. That's jnomemphis.com. Dry rub, sauce, barbecue. Let's go!
I just thought to myself, I'm like, what if this is what I'm up against with some of these guys? Obviously, most of the guys that I'm up against are probably, I think as an average pro fisherman have a higher intelligence than the average public, probably, or the average public. The average. If you took all the fishermen and put them in a put them in a pool, I think your professional fisherman would probably have an higher average intellect than the average of that pool of just regular fishermen.
Sure.
But
that makes sense.
By no means, but maybe there's a few of us.
Except for Matt Robertson. No, just kidding.
But maybe there's a few of us. I don't know Matt. Never met him, so I can't.
I would love to talk to that dude.
I've seen him on TV, but so anyways, but I mean, there certainly has to be some extremely. I mean, most of the guys that I run into, the other pro anglers, and that they're all just seem very sharp intellectually. Like the Bridgeford fishing team, for example, there's like 6 of us on the team. We have team meetings from time to time where the Bridgeford management brings all the pros together and we talk about marketing, stuff. And I mean, just the minds of my fellow teammates. There's some sharp minds there.
Yeah.
I mean, we got Matt Stefan,
Oh,
Randy
gosh.
Blaukat, Luke
Yep.
Clausen.
Yep.
Luke Clausen is a
Great fisherman.
just like he seems like an example of that loosey goosey type.
Sure.
Because I've been, we used as the Bridgeford team used to go to the U.S. Open, which is the tournament they have on Lake Mead.
Yep.
It's the biggest tournament out west every year, and so you get to hang out with these guys, and Luke and that, and Luke was just so laid back, so I mean, everybody on the whole team's like, yeah, we got to get to the launch early, that's gonna be a big line and launch it, and Luke's like, I'm just gonna launch right down here, and like 20, it's like a 15-minute boat ride from where he's launching. And he's talking about launching right down here like 20 minutes before takeoff. Takeoff's at 7. I'm going to launch down here at 6:40. Yeah, he's just so chill. And I'm like, yeah, that definitely's got to work for him. It's some advantage just to be that laid back and not get all worked up in just a nervous wreck.
Yep. Well, it's so like talking to Figgy on this podcast, this is kind of ringing home for me on what we're talking about. Staying in your own lane and understanding who you are as an angler. Like you just described that chess player, and like Jacob Wheeler is a guy who's established himself as a machine. Generalist, can kind of do it any way he wants to. And then you've got your guys like John Cox, who kind of trump the whole Jacob Wheeler theory, right? But John Cox is John Cox. Then you've got Keith Pochet, who trumps that theory, and he might not win Angler of the Year, but he wins an event, right? And for you, I'm looking at you as a guy who's
who
maybe
am I?
thinking about.
I'm still
you're
trying to
thinking
figure that out.
that you maybe need to be Jacob Wheeler, right, to compete. And I think that everybody's thinking they need to be Jacob Wheeler to compete. But
I need to
Jim
be
Moynagh. You need to be Jim Moynagh, right?
Well, I need to be that for sure, but
that's how you beat Jacob Wheeler. I think
to beat Jacob Wheeler, it comes back to you have to know information. You have to know just knowledge of what's going on. And that like if you're competing against somebody on their home body of water, they just have all this information in their head.
Yep.
And that's such a huge advantage. It doesn't mean you can't beat them.
Yep.
But that knowledge, that information, that knowledge, and if you apply it the right way, that's going to, you're going to get beat by somebody who has superior knowledge, superior information, and the ability to execute that information. You're going to get beat by that person if they have superior. Now, sometimes you can get a little special piece of information that you know.
Yep.
You may not know more than that person, but what you do know is so special.
Yep.
That you can beat them. Like when I got onto that football jig before everybody else.
Yep.
I had that little piece of information, and that was a freaking monumental little piece of information.
What's the one thing if you're fishing a certain type of way that you would say, if you're doing this and everyone else is doing it, you feel that you're going to do it better than them?
Oh.
You know what I mean?
That's
like where you could care less if everyone else has it in their hand because you feel so confident and so dominant with this thing in your hand, with the boat here, and fishing this certain type of way.
Yeah. See, that's where maybe I struggle a little bit.
Sure.
Because if it ends up, if it's a tournament where let's say it's going to be I don't know, a frogging tournament.
Yep.
It's like, well, I don't really feel like I'm better than all these guys at frogging.
It's kind of how I feel.
And
eating
that's
frog.
just an example, but
that speaks to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm like, what? But if this, if all these fish are in these lily pads or matted, milfoil mats or whatever, and this is how they're catching them, I mean, I guess I got to do it. I don't think I'm better than anybody else doing this. I think I'm just average. But, so I end up doing that and hope for the lucky bite. but it's kind of not a good attitude, really.
But I mean, there's other ways to catch those fish too. Have you ever thrown a 6-inch Senko on a bait caster in some of them pockets?
Yeah.
You know, and like
Yeah.
there's
punching heavy jigs and all in Texas rigs.
Thinking about maybe it's not just a bait you're particularly good at, but maybe it's, you know, making the most of an area and really understanding the intimacies of an area, so that everyone's catching them on a frog, but you know how to catch them on a frog. Maybe you pick up a couple extras on a little Senko because you understand how they move throughout that slop. You know, it's maybe not just I'm good at fishing a football jig, so that's what I need to do. But like, there's a lot of, it's a never ending sport, right? So there's, to me, like, that's what I'm good at, right? Is I'm not a better power fisherman than Kevin Van Dam, but I learned how to fish slow and methodical, right? So if there's an area that is a good winning area, I feel I can potentially fish it better than some other guys because I'm going to fish it slower, right? But then there's the mentality of you cover more water and you fish for the biters and you do that, right? And the guys who do that, they win doing that. The guys who do what I do win doing what I do. And I guess maybe I'm getting to just a question of how you fish, but I think we all fish a lot of different ways, and it's trying to hone in on your competitive advantage, right? That guy figured out he's the best at chess, so he's playing chess, not checkers, right? Because he's the best at chess. You know, tournament fishing, to me, there's a generalist aspect to it, but John Cox is, you know, disproving that. You've got guys continuously disproving that.
Yeah, John he definitely knows what lane he's in and knows it well, that's for sure. But yeah, I've seen him kill him on smallmouth fisheries, you know, with drop shots. So he's
shallow.
He's just one of those fishy guys, you know.
He is, and you are too, though. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at is you're a fishy guy. You've proven it in Minnesota. You've proven it that you can find something, you can take it, and you can dominate with it. And I think you've got some good years up ahead, and I guess to me, I want to see you succeed more than anybody, Jim.
Well, that's right. I keep telling myself too, you know, I got some. You mentioned unfinished business.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's kind of how I feel too. There's goals that I set in the sport when I first started. First year I fished, you know, on the national basis was in 1995. And at that time, I mean, I had goals of, you know, making the classic and being anglers of the years and, you know, just being a big shot. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And then FLW came along in 97, and then the goals are still the same, but now, you know, I want to be the angler of the year for FLW Tour or Bassmaster and win a bunch of tournaments and kick ass pretty much.
Absolutely.
So, but a lot of those goals, I mean, still don't have an Angler of the Year title. Haven't won a national tournament since 1997. Haven't won a championship. And just, so there's goals out there that just haven't been reached. And it just bugs the heck out of me. And it's bugging me more and more every year because I'm older now. I'm 57. Every year I get older. So do you. So does everybody. So, and I know, so I'm almost feeling like if I don't get it done soon, it ain't ever going to happen but then I want to disprove it. At the same time, I want to disprove that statement.
Yep.
But nobody can argue this on the other side of this. There is an age that a person reaches where their performance starts to fall.
Yep.
And eventually it'll fall enough where they're just no longer competitive.
I'm going to just give you a quick glass half full statement. Thank God you're not a football player.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the good news about fishing.
Right.
Is Rick Clunn, what has he got? 2-3 wins in the last 4 years, 5 years?
Yeah, I know
He's older than you.
Yeah. But but even his performance, I mean.
Well, I understand. Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't think so highly of him and his ability to fish? He's awesome.
He's not what he once was.
That's what I was getting at.
And I agree 100%.
Even his
with
performance. That. But one thing I've noticed with the old superstars we have now.
Yep.
they're not as consistent as they used to be.
No.
But they can pop up out of nowhere and win one.
Right.
You're right.
That's what I'm saying with
They
you,
have-
man. And I'm not calling you old, but what I'm saying is like that. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So getting back to what I was saying regarding my age of 57 and my coming years, it's like, at what is the age where I'm going to start falling off? Maybe I already have, just slightly bit, but I don't know. You can't really say that though, because I mean, this last season was pretty good.
Yeah, it was.
So, but there is eventually going to hit that age. But I'm trying to avoid that age. I'm trying to put that age back as far as I can. And it's a different age for everybody.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
When I was like 40, I'd say, yeah. It seems like once guys get to be about 60, they start losing it.
Sure.
I'm up 60 in 3 years. But
Really?
yeah.
You don't look
Well,
it. You look young.
I'm 57. Well, thanks. I'm 57.
You look 49 and a half, if I was
Okay.
to guess.
Okay. So anyhow, I just, but now that I'm 3 years from that, I'm like, well, man, I'm still going pretty strong at 60. So for me, maybe it's going to be a date that's later than that. You know, maybe I can get to, and here, speaking of Rick Lund, I love a quote that people have pointed out to me that was quoted as saying, and I don't know when he said this. I'm assuming it's within the last few years because I've never heard it before, but I've heard it a couple different people within the last year. And now I'm not going to have the quote exact, but basically it goes like this: don't assume that your best years are behind you. Have you heard him say that?
That's the one I was going to guess.
Yeah.
And I love that quote.
That is it's going to mean, as much as you like it now, when you're 57 like I am, you're going to like it even more.
Yeah.
Because, I'm not ready to be wheeled out into the pasture. It's like, but at the same time, I got to hold on to my sense of realism, and I got to recognize when I am not doing well in the sport. I got to recognize I got to step away at some point, but that point ain't now. And to Rick's quote, you don't assume your best years are behind you. And that's the other thing. I'm like, with this career I've had, well, if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see a quote there, or it's kind of, I don't know what it is, a little description of my channel, but I describe myself as a journeyman bass fisherman. And I'm like, because that's kind of how I feel like it is, just, out there doing it, competing, but just not at the star level, and I'm like, if I could ever just finally win Angler of the Year somewhere, or just, get on a run where I win a few tournaments, that could just like solidify the whole, okay, he wasn't just a journeyman. And it's like, and that plus, it would be a good story. It'd garner some attention if a guy like me suddenly started winning stuff.
It'd be awesome, man.
Yeah. All of a sudden the stories are not, yeah, look at all these young guys coming up. Yeah, watch out for these young. I mean, that's all I hear now. Yep. Oh man, these young guys. Oh, they're so incredible. Blah 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 blah. Young this, young that. Blah blah blah.
Yep.
What? Jim Moynagh won Angler of the Year. Well, how old?
I want to see it.
Is that
so
the guy?
bad.
Is that the guy that used to fish the FLW? Is he still around?
Love seeing that.
He's still around. It's like, yeah,
he's still around.
Still around.
Damn right.
Still around. Here I am with the Angler of the Year title. That's kind of that's why I'm still doing this.
Well, hey man, dude, just remember, like every single thing. Well, hopefully you don't lose sleep over this, but spot X or spot Y, right? Like it's right in front of you,
Yeah.
It's right there for you. The next year, the year after that, you got X and Y, and one of these years you're going to pick spot Y, more times than you shouldn't, and it's going to go your way, man, because you don't quit. To me, it's it'd be such a cool story. It'd be a Rocky Balboa situation where like Sylvester Stallone pitched the movie Rocky like 10,000 times.
Yeah,
and
I saw it in the theater when it first came out.
Really?
Yes.
It's a great movie. Yeah, It's one of the few movies that had a good sequel.
Yeah.
But I think you should never forget Sylvester Stallone every time you drive to a tournament because, that's one of the greatest movie series of all time. And if he would have quit at age 58 or age 59 or whatever questioning that was, Rocky would have never been a thing. So I think with you, just don't quit, Jim. And I think like we're gonna hear your name loud and clear.
Yeah, well, I'm still writing my story, so.
But I think the reason it hasn't happened is I think you need to bring the hair back first.
The hair,
yes.
Yeah. Well, that was only part of my. History. I had it for about 10 years, so
not long enough. It's legendary.
Before that, well, you got Matt Robertson with the long hair. You got Fighter with it. I'm like, okay, I can't compete with that.
You can. You invented it. You're like, yeah.
This shit's too scraggly now.
It's
like part of the reason why I cut it off. I'm like, man, this is just getting too thin.
Leather jackets aren't cool anymore. But so what was about the hair? Did you have a little something to that? It looked good on you, but
thanks. I don't know. It was just a phase, I guess.
I think it was an old desert Indian trick.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. I don't even know what it is. Sometimes I sit and ask myself, like, why? What was I doing with that hair?
Grow it if you got it, man.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because a few years before I grew it out, I started growing it out like in the late 2000s.
Yep.
And it wasn't a year or two before that I actually shaved it bald.
Yep.
And this guy I knew who was bald, he's like, what did you do that for? You got to grow that stuff out while you can.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I started thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, he's probably right.
Right.
So it wasn't long after that I just started just not ever getting a haircut.
Sure.
And I went with it for a long time and for like 10 years or whatever. But I don't know, just had enough.
I'm a little bit of an old soul, so I've always liked like the 70s and music from like the 70s and the 80s. Are you like a big like 80s rock guy? Like I always pictured you as like you jammed to Iron Maiden like on the way to the ramp or something,
Yeah, I like, when it comes to music, I like lots of genres of music.
Sure.
But I'm not afraid of death metal or the hardest shit you can find, and not afraid to listen to some rather Yanni or whatever.
A little saxophone.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to get into that slow, just mellow stuff either.
Sure, cool.
Yeah.
I'm a big music guy, so I'm gonna bug you a little bit more. Is there do you have like a pre-tournament song that was like your drive to the ramp song or anything like that?
Back in the day, I would. This wasn't long after the Metallica Black album came out.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd rock that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I heard they were gonna be live or were live in Minneapolis or something. Probably one of their last shows, but big Metallica guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was back in the day, but I don't know. Music. Usually, most of the time, it's quiet in the truck when I'm driving to the ramp. Sure. I listen a lot of music, and sometimes I'll put something on.
Sure.
Yeah, but in I don't know. It's been it's not a routine.
Well,
and here's why.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I don't want to get all pumped up and just ready to
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like it's better if my emotions stay away from my thinking.
So you're more of a Yanni on the way to the boat ramp. Nothing.
Nothing.
Yep.
Pretty much most of the time.
You're meditating. That sounds like meditating.
I'm just like, I just want to ease into, because I know once it gets going, all my energy, I mean, by the end of a tournament day, man, the energy is just sucked out of you.
Feel dead. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't want to like be like,
mm-hmm.
right away in the morning. I want to ease into it, just be mellow, launch your boat, sit in your boat for a while you wait for the launch time to get, to come to be. And then by then I've tinkered with some baits a little bit in the morning, and now it's time to fucking kick ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just figured you've had so much road time.
And run that kick ass mentality for the next 8 hours.
Well, I like before a game or something like that, I found like when I used to play hockey, I found like calmer music. I played better after listening to like calmer music than I would like rap or like metal or something.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to like we're naturally going to get jitters going into an event like no matter what. So you almost need to like reel it back a little bit so you don't backlash on your first 3 casts, which I seem to get excited that way sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. If you're just too wound up to go, that's and I'm still not immune to that, because I'll be out there the first 10 minutes of the morning and I'll suddenly realize, okay, you just drove your boat. First thing you did is you drove your boat right up on top of your waypoint when you wanted to cast to it first. Then you hastily grabbed the rod, and that caught on another rod and flipped that in the water, which you had to quickly scramble for.
Yep.
Then you made a backlash on your first 2 casts, like you were saying. And then when a fish bit, you set the hook too quick. So it's like okay, because I'm not immune to that. Then I'll just like, what are you doing? This is not gonna work if you do this all day. So then you just kind of try to get calm down, find the rhythm that's appropriate, and just fish.
It makes me think of Champions Tour on that Gull Lake event. When I got to that first spot, you know how we can't cast till 7?
Yeah.
But you'll get to your spot like before that?
Yes.
So I couldn't believe I got it. And then I'm like, put the trolling motor down. I'm like too close. I'm like, oh, we got like 7 minutes. I'm just kind of a crackhead and I pan around and I'm looking at the spot on the spot, and they're just kidney beans swimming around on active target. And I'm like literally shaking on my first cast. I had to probably get 5 casts out of the way before I probably worked my jig right.
Yeah.
Like it was just like, and I just become like a crackhead sometimes. So I can relate with that big time. I just figured you had so much road time that you'd heard all the songs like 12 times, and you're like, I'm kind of sick of music now. But
no, I don't get sick of music.
No.
After the day of competition, a lot of times I'll get back to my campground, and because I stay in a pickup camper, so and the camper stays at the campground. So anyways, a lot of times afterward that evening I might play some music, and a lot of road time driving to a tournament, home from a tournament. That's usually mixing some music, and so that's wouldn't want to do without it. That's for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think podcasts, like for me, help like a long drive go by just better than anything. It seems like now, if I've got a long drive, you can put a podcast in, kind of makes it go faster.
Yeah, that's right. I do the same. That's in more recent years, but I found myself doing the same thing. Just plug in a Joe Rogan or.
I love Rogan.
Yeah.
Yep.
Him or Lex Friedman. You ever listen to him?
I love Lex Friedman. I'm
I'm
glad you mentioned him. That's cool.
Yeah, he does what he does is really well. And then just other miscellaneous people, and a lot of stuff out there. That's for sure.
Oh gosh, it's endless. I mean, the information out there for fishing is just crazy. I mean,
and a lot of fishing podcasts. I listen to a lot of those.
I'm partial on those, but I love Rogan. I love Friedman, and there's a few fishing podcasts I really like too.
Yeah, what is your favorite?
I like the Serious Angler. Bass University though, to me is probably one of my favorites, but I'll dabble in. I'm not like this diehard on any of them, but I would say the Bass U ones. I like Thrifts and Aries. How about you? Straight casts. I like straight casts.
I'd say everything I look at is on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
So I like keeping up with. I guess this would be like I like watching Todd Castledyne's YouTube channel.
Okay.
I watch Randy Blaukett's channel all the time.
Yep.
Not necessarily because he's my teammate, and that I really admire that guy a lot. I don't.
He's a controversial one.
He
but
is. I don't agree with all this stuff that he says.
I understand. Yeah.
But I know the man behind all that just from hanging around him, so I really admire that.
Sure.
But
I'd say you and him have a lot of similarities in terms of like your careers and stuff. You're both known as very consistent anglers.
Yeah. He's we got different styles though.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But who else? BTL.
Yep.
Bass Talk Live. I like checking in with those guys. I like, and there's a lot of them that I don't even know about, I'm sure.
Well, now you know about the Bass Galaxy, so that's cool.
Yes, I do. I do. So yeah, and then sometimes if I find something specific for a lake, a lot of times, if there's a lake I'm going to, I'll do searches and try to find out who's doing YouTube videos on that lake, or who's doing, like on Rayburn, you have to listen to Ken Smith's channel if you go to Rayburn. Do you know Ken Smith?
He does some really good bass boat reviews and walkthroughs. That's how I learned.
That's how you got him? Okay.
Because I do YouTube videos for boat sales and stuff like that, so I'm always looking to see what's out there, and he has a really good boat reviews. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he's recently what I've seen is he's Rayburn's got some really low water right now, so I think it keeps coming up to my feed, but I haven't watched any of them yet because I know I'm going to Rayburn soon.
Yep. As
my first tournament in January, towards the end of January.
Yep.
But I think what he's done, just by looking at the feed and the the thumbnail in the description, it's like I think what he's doing is he's like doing drone flyovers of certain sections of the lake under low water conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that'd be really interesting to check that out. But he's done all kinds of stuff on Rayburn that's just informative for sure.
Right. What do you do besides bass fish? Do you do anything besides bass fish?
What do I do besides bass fish? Fish? No. Oh, I do, but gosh, I mean, if I'm gonna do something fun, I'm gonna maybe go see some live music.
Okay.
Or I don't know. I mean, I work out.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, which is that's important for. I'm doing that with the belief that it's gonna make me just be more sharp physically and mentally for a longer time.
I agree with that.
So like we talked about the decline, putting off my decline in my ability to a later age.
Yep.
So I'm not like a total workout and fanatic about it, and it gets to be difficult when you really start stringing tournaments together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there'll be weeks that go by where, I don't do any workouts, but like this time of year, I make sure I try to get back up into shape and I try to stay in shape as much as I can throughout the season, because just you got to be physically. If you look, we talked about age or intellect earlier as far as amongst the pro anglers. If you look at their just physical shape that they're in, you don't have to be like a super athlete or a great athlete to be good to be a successful pro fisherman. But I'm just saying, if you just look at their general condition physically, I'd say on average your typical bass pros probably in better shape than just the general public's average.
Yep, I would agree.
I mean, we definitely have some heavier guys and pot belly types, but and they catch the shit out of them. But I think there's something to just having that physical condition. It's an aid, because I mean, if you're carrying around an extra 70 pounds all day, day after day, I mean, it's going to wear on you.
Yeah.
And it's going to wear on your mental part of it, and you don't want that.
Right.
You want your mental part not to be thinking about how your back aches. You want your mental part be thinking about what your next move is.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So like workouts, I mean, for fishing, do those consist of like tying a 20-pound mono to a tree and a flipping stick? And,
Yeah,
get the
right.
arms going, or do you have any like specific types of workouts that kind of work for you? I guess I'm not a big. I need to get more into that. So
I don't have any like certifiable recommendations.
no, but like, do you run or do you like go to the gym? Or
yeah, I mean, I do. I have days where I lift. I have days where I do just conditioning, cardio type conditioning.
Sure.
Yeah. So
no yoga for you?
No. See, that's all part of that meditation thing, and I think people meditate when they just don't know they're meditating.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I know I do. The life of a professional bass angler is so solitary much of the time.
Right.
So
right.
I mean, when you're alone so much, all your thoughts are within you, thinking about whatever. So you're always just self-thinking about what's going on, and so I think you can't help but fall into meditation without even knowing it sometimes.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and whether you bring music or exercise into it, it might still be medication. Medication.
Yeah, for sure.
Medicine.
Speaking meditation, I'm going to go meditate while I take a pee, Jim.
Okay.
How old were you when you won your first bass? Like, won your first kind of bass tournament that made you feel like, this is where I belong. This is what I need to do. How old were you? What year was it? What tournament was that?
Well, I started fishing competitively in a bass club called the Tackle Busters Bass Club back in 1983 is when I joined.
Okay.
And it was a club that my dad had helped start. So there's maybe 20 members in this club. So I joined it in 1983. So it would have been at the beginning of their season. So so they had I don't know, 5 tournaments or something like that, 5 or 6 tournaments in the season. Well, we had 7 tournaments in the season, but for this particular state championship that was later in the fall, we had 5 tournaments up to that point. And in our this was back when there was something called the Bass Federation, BASS Federation.
Yep.
So every state had their federation.
Mm-hmm.
So this club, Tackle Busters Bass Club, was part of that. So there was a state federation tournament every year.
Yep.
So this was going to be in the fall, in September. And so each club was allowed to send 6 members of their club to this state tournament.
Still kind of that way.
I have no clue what they're doing now.
Kind of same thing, just no federation anymore.
Okay.
Maybe it's called something different is all.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway.
So I qualified for the state tournament in 6th place in our club. So I got the last spot.
Yep.
Out of maybe 20 guys. And, I don't have a boat. I don't even own a boat.
Sure.
So, so you're fishing, out of the backs of other guys' boats.
Yep.
And we had a rule in our club that each guy gets to fish out of the front half the time. So most of the time I took my front half.
Yeah, of course.
I took my time in the front, for my half. But
they took that rule away now. But anyway.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but anyway, so I qualified for the state tournament. And my dad, who was a high school football coach, well, he couldn't fish in a fall tournament because he was busy coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to use his boat. So our state tournament was on Lake Minnetonka by Grand Rapids, and it was a 2-day tournament.
Yep.
And I won that tournament with a 2-day total of 5 fish for 16 pounds, 4 ounces.
Sure.
Something like that. So that was my first. That was my first what I call a big win. I was 18, and I was the state champion. State champion.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
it sounds ridiculous to me that I was 18 and I was a state champion, but that's what it was.
I mean, it's not ridiculous. That was the beginning, man.
Yeah, I
This is
caught
where
him.
It all
It
began.
was the beginning. I caught him. I caught all the fish on a black skirted, silver bladed flex spinnerbait.
On Pokegama.
Yeah, if you ever remember what that was.
No. Well, I know what a black
That's
spinnerbait is.
Yeah,
but-
no, it was a flex spinnerbait. They were made like out east somewhere, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, the Indiana blades. And of course, the lake fished way tougher. I mean, there wasn't near as many bass in that lake
Sure.
then as there is now. Like a lot of lakes back
Yep.
then. Like the whitefish chain in Brainerd, that thing has exploded. I mean, when I first started fishing there, my first year was like 83 or 84. We had a Tackle Busters Club tournament there. And sure, we didn't know how to catch them near as good back then. But still, there just wasn't near as many bass back then either. Sure. But the size of the bass was much bigger back then because they didn't see the pressure that they do now.
Sure.
So you're catching fewer fish, but bigger ones.
So you think there was literally less bass swimming in the lake then? Not necessarily that we think about it. We didn't have any of the stuff we got now. You know, I always ask myself, okay, I believe that there was less bass, but I also believe that we maybe were a lot less good at catching them, but I don't know.
We were way less good at catching them back then, but just looking back at how I did catch them back then, out of like the whitefish chain, if I took that same bait and went there now, I'd catch so many more bass now.
Sure.
But most of them would be most of them would be like 3/4 of a pound to a pound and a half. Because you have so many of that size in that whitefish chain. Gull Lake's the same way.
Yep.
Gull Lake, you see just an ever increasing population of largemouths in Gull Lake since I've ever first time I fished there was in the mid '80s, and there was fewer bass then, but now there's it's so much easier to catch them. I mean, like you said, we know how to catch them much better now. But even then, I mean, if I took what I know now and go back to 1984 and fish Gull Lake, I'm not going to catch near as many in that time period as if I go there next July, this coming July.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Huh. Crazy.
Because it's just way, for whatever reason.
I'm curious because we haven't been stocking them, you know?
No, Minnesota doesn't stock largemouth bass.
No. We've been stocking walleyes, you know, and there doesn't seem to be more of them.
Right.
But they don't seem, them stocking fish, them walleyes, they don't seem to reproduce the ones they stock. I'm no biologist, but.
No, the reason why they stock walleyes, there's a couple reasons. But
people pay for them.
People pay for them. That's what a lot of people. That's what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And that they got their 700-acre lake that they go to or they live on. It has zero natural walleye reproduction in their lake, but they want walleyes in their lake. So the DNR, that's part of their budget. So the DNR shows up every 2 years and puts a bunch of fresh walleyes in their lake. Which is fine. Let's make people happy.
I'm all about it. It just seems like, there's lakes that were designed to have walleyes reproduce, and then there's lakes that they just kind of are forced walleye lakes.
Yeah, they are. They are forced. That's what they are, forced walleye lakes. But I don't know. Just for whatever reason, the policy was set that that's the way it should be, and it's fine by me. And I'm not a walleye guy too much. I mean, I'll catch them. Yeah, I'll catch them. Yeah. Let me bite one when I'm out fun fishing.
Absolutely.
Why not?
What's crazy to me is the evolution and the boom of smallmouth of tournament fishing for smallmouth over the years. Because even just from when I started, it seems like 2 to 3 times the amount of lakes have them than when I started. I mean, you were fishing tournaments where there really wasn't many smallmouth tournaments.
Yeah.
I mean,
there is a boom in smallmouths in Minnesota. I mean, Mille Lacs. There was always. I mean, I've always known about smallies and Mille Lacs. But it's like now, it just seems like that population has grown and shifted deeper even maybe than they used to be. From what I've been told, they used to, because I'm not a Mille Lacs expert by any means. But I was told they used to be just restricted more to shallow water, but now you can find them out all over the place in deep water.
Yep.
So that fishery's definitely evolved. But even there's like where my family property is.
Yep.
On a little lake. It's got maybe, 1,800 acres. That lake never had any smallmouth, and now they're in there. And there's a lot of lakes in the same situation as that lake. Excuse me. Just a lot of I don't know where these smallies are. I don't know if they're just.
I think people are moving them between you.
Well,
and me.
probably. I'm sure that's what's going on.
Which, I mean,
and in fact,
I'm not complaining about it.
Yeah,
I love catching them things.
My dad was being blamed for moving the smallies to our family property is, but I know he didn't do it.
Well, I mean, you got
and I
Moynaghs
know
on the lake. It was probably them.
Well, that's
right?
yeah. Here's kind of a big coincidence. So this is a 1,700 acre lake, and Bob Downey, the Elite Pro, their family's got a place on the same lake. Yeah, same lake. Yeah, it's quite the coincidence.
Quite the coincidence. So I think we definitely know who put them smallies in there now.
Yeah, it must be Bob.
It had to be Downey.
Because it wasn't any of my family.
But that's just crazy to me. And now it's a real dominant aspect of pro bass fishing is a smallmouth, and I think that's created a lot of opportunities for guys in Minnesota to do it, because there's an aspect of the fishing season that allows for it now more consistently than it used to. I mean, Champlain even used to be one with largemouth a lot more than it is nowadays.
Yeah, I think the pro tours have made a conscious decision to just hold more tournaments in northern smallmouth fisheries than what they used to.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah, I love it. That's, I mean, well, for one, that means less driving for me.
Right.
Usually, but if they keep going to New York, that's still freaking 20 hours of plus driving.
But I mean, if you're fishing a pro event, like, to me, I'd much rather go fish for big smallies and catch some fish than I would beat my head in at the Sabine River for 9 pounds or whatever.
Yeah, those situations are that's tough. You know what was always tough for me was they'd always the FLW Tour Championships are always like early August or mid-August.
Yep.
And I would be fishing stuff here in Minnesota, June, and then in July. In July we'd have the Rainy Lake tournament where we just blast fish left and right. So I'd be just drilling fish for June, July, and then all of a sudden the FLW Tour Championship would come up, and it'd be on, just some place deep in the south.
Yeah.
90% humidity,
South
98 degrees.
August.
Yeah, 98 degrees.
Yeah.
And the fish are in some ultimate funk of some kind.
One guy catches 1 5-pounder on a shaky head type of deal.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like if you get a limit, man, you're good. You're really good shape, kind of a situation. And that was always that was always just mentally challenging to deal with that.
I believe it.
Some years I did better with it than others. I mean, but I don't know. It's good to see some of these championships finally. That's just the irony of it, because I complained about all these Southern championships all the time. And then finally, the MLF Pro Circuit, they bring their championships north. So they came to Sturgeon Bay.
Yep.
They came to La Crosse. Then last year was the St. Lawrence River. 3 Northern Fisheries in a row. I made all 3 championships, and I sucked in all 3 of them. I was like, so that pretty much, but that'll shut me up for about ever complaining about a Southern championship again, because I didn't do any better in the North championships than I did in the South championships. So
seems like when I think I'm gonna do good in a tournament before the tournament, like lakes that I've been to before, have done well before, it seems like those are the ones I don't do as well in, and then those lakes that you maybe kept just a more open mind for seems to work out. For me, it's new bodies of water in Minnesota. I don't know what it is. They like me or I like them or whatever, but I can relate with that a little bit.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of guys say similar to what you said, and I'll put it in terms of this way. A lot of people ask me, Jim, how do you like the schedule for next year? How do you like the FLW schedule, or what you're fishing next year? Do you like the lakes that are on the list?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you know what? This is what I tell them, because this is what I believe. This is how I feel. I'm like, I don't get excited about what I see in the schedule. I don't get down on the schedule, because I know after all these years, similar to what you're saying, if there's a lake on the schedule that I used to get that normally I'd be excited about, let's say early in my career, I'd be like, oh yeah, great, this lake's on the schedule. And then, the next one after that would be like, oh no, then I got to go to that lake. Well, guess which one I do well on and which one I do poor on, right? The one that I was afraid I was going to do shitty at is the one that I cracked the top 10. And then the one that I was like, fist pumping for was the one that I finished in the hundreds. So that's just, so I never put too much into what the lakes are on there, other than just prepare for them.
I love that mentality. I'm glad you said that, because Champions Tour last year was a prime example for me. I was most excited for the River and Vermilion, and those were my 2 horrible. I had horrible finishes at both of them. I was like, Gull, I don't really know. Like, I don't hate it, but I don't like. It was kind of one I felt was more of a challenge for me, just because of August, and I know how much pressure the lake gets, and sure as shit, I was completely wrong, and it was the opposite was the outcome. So that's crazy.
Yeah, you just right. And I don't know why that is sometimes. I think in my case I don't know why that is. In some cases, the reason why I do good on lakes that I'm negative towards, it's like, I think it's because it puts me in a position where I got this huge challenge in front of me.
Yep.
Mentally, and mentally I prepare myself better for it, maybe.
Yep.
And I prepare, and not just mentally, but also to prepare my tackle better, prepare everything better, maybe dig a little deeper into the pre-tournament research, and just get on more of a comfortable level. Whereas if it's a lake that I've been to, comfortable with, I've done well at, I may not take it as seriously. Like when the
River, for me,
like when a top 10 college football team is facing one of their weaker opponents in their division, they might overlook them to to the number 4 ranked team the following week, and they all of a sudden they get bit in the ass because they overlooked what they thought was going to be, a win for them. So they didn't prepare for it as well as they should have. They didn't mentally prepare for it. They didn't do the actual work part of it.
That's about the best example of that I could ever think of, is the football team playing down to a worse opponent.
Yeah,
it's
playing
the same
down.
thing. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you just assume you're gonna win. You assume you're gonna catch them, and you don't. You assume, which means you don't prepare as good. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you might say, oh, I caught him on this spot, that spot, and over here on Lunker Corner. Like, I catch them on these places all the time. Well, so then you go there and you practice, and nothing happens on those places, and all of a sudden you're lost. It's like, it's like, it happens.
It does. And so I did want to touch on this. You fished pretty much everywhere. I was looking at the Bass Fan, your stats on Bass Fan, and it's like there's nowhere Jim Moynagh hasn't really fished.
I'm not happy with Bass Fan.
Screw Bass Fan. I mean, I just thought it was crazy how many places you fished, and if you look at your stats on Bass Fan, I swear to God, you are solid, dude. You are solid. There's a lot of anglers that would not have even close to those stats who are damn good on Bass. They wouldn't have them on Bass Fan. So why aren't you happy with them, though?
Yeah, I was going to get to this.
Sorry.
As long as you brought up Bass Fan.
Yeah.
For two reasons. I think the content that they have on their page is still good.
Yep.
But there's much less of it these days.
Yeah.
For what it used to be the first thing I look at every morning, whether I was tournament fish away at a tournament or whether it was in my house in December.
Yep.
And I always, because they always had, it's not as much content, new stuff on there anymore. So, but when there is new stuff posted there, it's pretty good. But they don't follow the NPFL, which is the National Professional Fishing League.
Yep.
They don't put anything on there about that.
Yep.
When that's kind of significant in our sport.
I would agree.
And they've gotten away from putting as much information about like Toyota Series tournaments or Bass. I mean, they still carry, but they used to always have top 5 coverage of every turn. Even the top level tournaments. It seems like they cover the winners, but they don't dig down into the,
Yep.
3rd, 4th, 5th places as much as they used to.
Sure.
So for that, and then, and I don't know if they just financially, they just can't manpower the website like they used to. I don't know. It might come down to finances. They just can't pay for all the content they used to. I don't know. Or
maybe the dude's wife left him. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? But for years it was everything. I looked at it in the morning, every morning. But then here's the other thing that just bugs me. And it's so they have what's called the Bass Fan World Rankings.
Oh yeah.
Which used to mean something to me.
Right.
But now they still have it right, kind of. I mean, like right now, if you went there, Jacob Wheeler would be ranked number 1. So, and what people don't know, the Bass Fan World Rankings is they try to rank all the professional anglers, from top, 1, 2, 3, and so on, from all the top leagues. So it'd be MLF and Bassmaster Elite. So even though they don't compete in it, those guys don't compete against each other. They try to rank them. So if you look at the rankings now, they're totally unbalanced.
Yeah. I don't know how you balance them, but at the same time, there's stats and it is numbers. And if you took everything into consideration, there's a way to do it.
And here's an example. I can just take myself as an example.
Uh-huh.
So if they're balancing the MLF Pro Circuit evenly with the other 2 circuits, which they may not, I don't think they are, because in my last 3 years, I had a 27th in AOI, 25th and 25th. So why am I ranked like 180th? To me, that doesn't make sense.
I would agree with that.
And then if you take guys that have even done better than me in the MLF over the last few years, I mean, the top guys still ranked like, I don't know, 50th. I mean, there's only a few guys even in the top 100 out of the MLF or out of the MLF Pro Circuit.
Sure.
They're even the top 100. So and then if you look, it's like, it almost seems like the elites aren't getting as much balance, as much weight either. Some of the elite anglers, I'm like, why is this elite angler, way down here?
Right.
So I don't know. It's just, I think it's biased. It seems like to me and they should, if they're not going to weight the pro circuit guys the same, just kick their names out of the rankings.
Right.
So.
I'm not great with statistics, but I do remember one statistic from my statistics class that said that 90-some% of statistics aren't 100% accurate. So,
including that one?
Yeah, including that one. So, Yeah, I hope you never read too far into that, Jim, because it's probably not true. And
well, it just bugs me because I don't know. I hate to look at that. I hate to look and see me down at 180 when it's just like 180. It's like it's just.
I like that you look at it that way, and I don't think you should change that. But for me looking at it, I mean, dang, I'm talking to an angler who's, inaccurately ranked top 200 in the world on the bad side of it, right? So, I mean, for me, I'm not even on Bass Fan. I mean, the fact that you're ranked in the world for bass fishing is pretty cool from my perspective. But if I'm in your position, yeah, I don't think there's many numbers I would like that are outside of top 100.
Yeah,
and I think you deserve to be there. I think your numbers show that you deserve to be there.
Well,
they don't take time and years of experience into consideration either there.
Well, they do. They take,
to an extent.
I think what they base, I don't know what their formula is, but it's not weighted properly. And if they're not going to, if the leagues aren't going to be balanced evenly, I mean, I just don't know. I don't know. I just hate to see myself at that 170, 180 when I've posted 27th, 25th, 25th. I'm 180, and I'm not saying I should be posted like at 25th, but there's going to be 20 top 25 guys in the elites, top 25 guys in the Bass Pro Tour, and then there's going to be top 25 guys. So at worst, I should be 75. You know what I mean?
I don't disagree with that.
Because you got a pool of 75. So at worst, I should be 75. And 175? Come on.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. It's just so that's what bugs me about Bass Fan. Just take my name off the list.
No, don't take his name off the list, Bass Fan, but you can do better. Let's be honest. Jim Moynagh, don't sleep on this guy. Don't sleep on him one bit. He's hungrier than ever. So I am curious because I would love to fish some of the lakes that you've gotten to experience and travel to. Like, is there a place in the South that does compare to Minnesota fishing that you found?
Oh.
Like, you know what I mean? Florida's the only thing I can think of, or maybe
style. You mean
style? Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can ever say this is Minnesota fishing, but like, is there a lake down south that you could feel like don't need to change a lot of what you do up here, and you can be successful on a certain lake down there?
Yeah, I'd say. Well, you would think probably most of the grass lakes fish a little closer to how Minnesota, because most all the Minnesota lakes have some kind of weeds in it.
Yep.
And a lot of these southern reservoirs that do have them, there's a lot of what you know about weeds here that can apply to weeds there.
Right.
So I remember when I first went to Sam Rayburn and just started fishing there, I'm like, I feel comfortable here for some reason. And I still do, because it just, a drop-off's a drop-off. The weeds are the weeds.
Yep.
And I don't know, it just seems like the stuff that I could catch them here, I could catch them there.
Sure.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Lakes that I'm not comfortable with are some of the just all, like a lot of those Ozark lakes are just all rock.
Yep.
And can be really hit or miss for me on those lakes.
I gotta imagine those lakes are kind of a breed of their own in that sense. Like, just not. We don't do anything like that here. Like, if we do, it's a small strip of it's.
Yeah.
It's opposite day when you get down there.
Yeah, and then that's where forward-facing sonar, side imaging has really helped me a lot on those all rock lakes, because you can find those brush piles way faster. That if there's a brush pile pattern, it's just the right kind of underwater rock structure, you can see it on your electronics easier.
Sure.
See what's there even for fish. So, but the rock lakes have always been, I mean, like for years we'd always go to Beaver Lake for the FLW Tour, and that's an all-rock lake. And some years I'd just do crappie. Other year, I got 4th place one time there.
Yeah, good finish there.
So you just never know what's going to happen there.
Right.
And because I didn't completely understand what was going on all the time.
Well, I mean, how do you? It's I've fished down there enough to know that it's so weird. I've fished Kentucky Lake, and I've gotten on like a really good rattle trap bite there with Doug Petrock, and he was just schooling me on this rattle trap thing, and he was just moving the rattle trap like minusculely different than me. And I just watch him and try to do it, and I wouldn't catch him. And then once he told me, I stopped for a second before he went to pull it back again. It was like a light switch, and I just started catching them like crazy. And it just seems like those fish are very pattern oriented that way, but so much so that you can be doing almost the right thing and miss the boat.
That's the thing. That's the thing about southern fisheries. You can be almost, because for one reason, because they get so much fishing pressure.
Right.
You have to be so much more dialed into to what you need to do there. So it's easy to be almost dialed in, but you can still completely miss the boat because one little subtle thing you're missing, or just some little factor you just don't quite have a handle on it.
Yep.
So instead of catching 20 fish, you might catch 7 in a day.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Whereas in Minnesota, our fish are a little more forgiving in that way. Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're a little more, I mean, a lot of times people just say, yeah, those northern fish are dumb. They don't see the pressure. And that's a simple way of saying what we're talking about.
Right. Yep. Potomac. I do want to touch on that because that seems to be a lake that you've done well enough on that you're not supposed to. Like, guys like us aren't supposed to do well on tidal fisheries. It seems to be, for Minnesota anglers, it seems to be the one thing I haven't seen a Minnesota angler do is win a spotted bass tournament. I don't think I have. Maybe it's probably happened, but I don't like spotted bass and tidal fisheries seem to be a Minnesota angler's Achilles heel. So like the Potomac, it was cool to see you kind of figure that out because there's a tidal aspect, right?
Yeah, oh, definitely tidal aspect.
It seems like crazy to me.
Yeah, that's it's a fun place to. Tidal fisheries are fun because
that's what I hear.
Because you have that dynamic element of change with the water levels. So it's fun to fish those.
Sure,
definitely. And Tom Mansour won on Potomac River a couple years ago. Tom from lacrosse,
Yep, he's a legend as well.
Yeah, he's a legend for sure. And everybody's like, well, he's a river fisherman, but you don't have to be a river fisherman to catch them out there in Potomac.
Right.
In fact, the Potomac fish is fairly simple, really, to me.
Okay.
Because I mean, you're generally fishing 5-6 feet or less.
Sure. Yep.
So that just narrows everything down. Just makes the amount of water that much smaller where they can be.
Right.
And I don't always catch them there, but overall I've done all right there. Almost, actually, oh my God. The one time where I was right there to win one of these national tournaments was on the Potomac River, and man, that was fish. The winning. That's just one of those tournaments where multiple winning fish got off the hook and got away. It's like, dang it,
that's brutal.
Dang it. Yeah, so I almost won there. That was my closest. Well, that's the closest I've ever came to winning another national tournament. It was that one. Kentucky Lake was another. Well, if you want to hear a story,
I'd love to.
This was Kentucky Lake, probably 2014, 2015. The guy that won, he was just around for like 2 years. I can't remember his name now. I was thinking about him the other day, and I remembered his name then.
Jason Lambert?
No. Well, he got second in that tournament.
Okay.
I ended up third in that tournament. Jason Lambert was second, and then like Jimmy Nelson or God dang it,
Ron Nelson?
No, not Ron Nelson. His name just barely. But anyways,
John Canada.
I came to the. This is when we had a weigh-in at a Walmart parking lot.
Okay.
And so So I knew I had a really good day, and I knew I was going to finish well. So we're driving to the weigh-in, and the guy with me, I forget if he was a cameraman that was driving with me or a co-angler. They're not supposed to tell you what they are, but he's like, yeah, you're sitting good. And I'm like, so the seed was planted in my head. Oh, God, I might be winning this thing. So by the time I got to the Walmart parking lot, I was just jacked, just like, oh, my God, I might have won this. I might have won this. I might have won this. And so the FLW staff, they're flagging you in, waving you in through the parking lot to put you into a parking spot. So they pull me in, and I'm like the last guy to come in from the top 10. You know, there's only 10 guys. I'm the last guy to pull into where they want me to park. And the guy who ends up winning the tournament, I'm pulling in right behind him, right behind his outboard motor, to the rear of his, and immediately, and he's been there for a little bit, so he's already pulling fish out of his live well and putting them into the water in his bag to carry up to the holding tanks. And so I'm watching him pull his fish out, and you'd never seen a guy's expression or body language go from just being super excited to just like just so dejected, because every time he'd pull one out, I'm like, oh God, that's at least the size of my biggest one. Okay, oh gosh, that's another huge one. By the time I watched him pull them all out, I knew I hadn't won. So then it was like, well, maybe I'll get second. And then Jason Lambert beat me by, I think he had me by 10 ounces or something like that.
He's one of the best ledge fishermen to do it. So
yeah, he gets it done out there on Kentucky Lake and all those Pickwick and all those types. Yeah,
Kentucky Lake's not what it used to be. It's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for sure.
That was a ledge deal when that was going down?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
ledge fishing on Kentucky Lake in its heyday was a pretty special thing from what people describe.
Dude, I got on probably the biggest school of fish I ever got on was on that lake. In that particular school was not a giant fish, big fish type of school. It was a very unusual day actually, because I'm on the spot and literally for an hour I'm getting a bite on every cast for over an hour, and they weren't big ones.
Yep.
But by the time it was all said and done, I had like 15.5 pounds.
Mm-hmm. Solid start.
But about 3/4 of the way through this, fish, bite after bite after bite, catching fish, calling, blah, 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 doing this stuff, just going on and on. 3/4 of the way through this, dragging my football jig on the bottom, waiting for the next bite. And I turn over my shoulder to say something to my co-angler, and then like 4 miles up the lake, there's a tornado going across the lake.
No way.
Yeah, and I see all these boats.
Oh my God.
I see all these boats racing my direction. I'm like, oh my God. So then I'm like, I've never seen a tornado before, and I've never caught so many fish from one spot in one time. So these two completely unusual, one of a kind events in my life are happening at the exact same time.
So you're like, God, this school is firing especially good, and then there's this tornado blowing
there's a
by
tornado.
behind you.
Yeah, it's going.
No idea pre-front,
Yeah, it's like the tornado was going like straight, almost from where my perspective, it looked like it was going from straight west to east.
Okay,
so
that's good for Kentucky Lake, right?
Yeah, we were in no danger of the tornado. I mean, first of all, we were like 4 miles away, and definitely I kept my eye on it.
Yeah.
But it didn't take long for it to go across the lake and then hit the other shore.
Yeah.
And then it went on its own merry way.
Yeah. Went and screwed up Barkley for a while.
Yeah, screwed up. Yeah, probably messed with Barkley for a while, and who knows where it went after that. But, so that was rather unusual circumstance. Just the fact that it was the only tornado I've seen like that in person, but that happened to be at the exact same moment in my lifetime where I'm catching the most fish from one place without moving the boat that I've ever caught in my lifetime. Both of those at the same time.
During a tournament.
During competition.
That's cool.
Yeah. The only thing that could have made it better was if instead of catching a 15.5-pound bag out of that school, I would have caught a 25-pound bag. So, but it was fun though. God, there's a lot of fish there. But that's how that lake fished.
Yep.
And then it was like, and then I really believe that's year class of fish that I was catching off of that spot. That was the year class that propelled that fishery for the next several years until it finally just crashed. I think a lot of those fish just got old and died.
Right.
Yeah, but then the Asian carp that doesn't help.
No,
because they're eating all the grass, which and the bass fry like the grass to hide in and escape predators. And if you don't have the grass, you don't get the same kind of year classes. So the Asian carp, I mean, we may never see year classes like that in Kentucky Lake again, but who knows?
That's one invasive species that I think truly negatively impacts fishery. It seems like there's not a lot of others I can say that about.
I have that discussion a lot. Eurasian milfoil is great habitat for fish. It does not. The detriment to Eurasian water milfoil is some people just don't like to look at it.
That's it.
Yep. So that's it. To me, it's a complete waste of money to invest any money into prevention of Eurasian milfoil. Now,
hallelujah. I agree.
That's not to say there are very specific lakes where you may need to do something, because if the whole lake can grow milfoil,
yep,
and that means the whole lake can just be clogged with weeds, and there's no deep water where there's open water to navigate. Okay, let's do something in those situations, but let's not treat every lake under the umbrella that it's going to be ruined for eternity if Eurasian milfoil gets in those lakes.
I agree completely. They spray the absolute fuck out of it now.
They don't need to be doing that.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
It's dumping all these chemicals, whatever.
Makes me sick.
It does. If you want to talk about more, let's talk about zebra mussels.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't like. One of the negatives. This is the only negative that I can see towards them, and this is the tree hugger coming out in me. Is they say, there's scientists are worried that the zebra mussels are affecting populations of endangered mussels of other species. Native mussels.
Yep.
I'm like, to me, I'm like I like to preserve species on this planet.
Yep, I understand that.
So I don't want to see a native mussel population become extinct because of these zebra mussels. But that's in select bodies of water that they're already in. Let's put our money there, but I don't see the detriment of zebra mussels in just your typical natural lake. I don't. They're a nuisance to people in that they collect on dock posts, their boat hoists. I guess there's a nuisance to that. To me, it's no big deal.
Same.
Except when I have a 5-pounder under a dock wrapping around a zebra mussel encrusted dock pole, that's an issue. But
Yep. Definitely had to make some adjustments for that.
Yeah. Yes. Like they have to, and most of the time the adjustment is open the tackle box and they have to tie on a new one.
Yeah. Yep. There's a couple. Heavier line, heavier rod. That's about all I've found to help.
Yeah. It's one thing. It's mentioned gamma line earlier. A guy, I forget his name now. A guy I just met this year on the MLF Pro Circuit. A guy he's from the James River area where we had a tournament. And he was a competitor this past season. And we were talking about barnacles and that. And he said just heavy fluorogammon line is the best deterrent towards barnacles as far as resistance. Resistance to abrasion. You're still going to cut it like this if it catches that barnacle the right way.
The right way. A knife's a knife. Yep.
Yeah, but he said that's the best thing he's found, better than braid, and
I could see that,
better than other fluorocarbons.
Well, I've heard gamma and I'm not sponsored by a fluorocarbon company or anything, but I've heard Gamma holds up longer. Like, you don't have to change it out.
Oh, dude,
often.
I leave it spooled up forever.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, I might need to try that.
Not
crap.
forever, but
Use the edge stuff, the green stuff.
yeah. They have. Well, they make one fluorocarbon edge.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not sponsored by them either.
Well, that's what's cool. Is
I
we
do get it
talk
at
about whatever.
I do get it at a slight discount. So
You had to mention that. I'm just kidding.
that's slight. I mean,
We just had a 1,000-yard spool sold. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, it's a slight discount, but not. It's not really. I don't have any sponsor.
No, that's not a sponsor.
Yeah, I
for
don't
Jim
have any-
Moynagh, that's not a sponsor.
I don't have
for
any
Jim Moynagh.
obligations to them, and
Nope.
they don't expect anything out of me. So
Perfect.
but anyways, but it's good. It's really good, and I mean, I don't have to respool that edge all the time. I can let it roll, but I do. You got to keep an eye. Any line, you got to keep an eye on. But it's more of a as needed basis when I spool it. It's not mandatory that I respool before every tournament with their fluorocarbon. They also sell a copolymer line. It's like a copolymer monofilament, which that line doesn't. That's more like a monofilament. So
Yep.
and that line, that's what I use for that too.
Sure.
For those purposes. But I can't say this. That's more like with any monofilament. That's more like any other monofilament where it does weather. You got to change it more often. But they're fluorocarbon, man. Sometimes the only time I change it is when there's not enough left on my spool.
That's a wonderful problem to have.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be trying some this year.
Which, by the way, before you think I've got 1,000 yards on my spool, I do fill up my spools with some backing. So when I do put on fresh line onto a reel, like say a baitcaster, I mean, I'll only have enough to make like 2 long casts. That's all the line I put on there. So,
Gotcha. Well, that's smart.
and that's what fills it, and that fills it to full, to its full level.
Yep.
Because I have all that other line, at what I call backing, already on there.
Well, that's just economically smart, right?
It's the economical efficiency.
Well, it's like all you're doing is creating memory. It seems like the deeper you go, if you're going to plan to use that. But getting back on the zebra mussel topic, we've really seen tournament weights grow because of them in Minnesota. But what I've noticed and I'm no biologist, but this is just what I've seen, is it seems like it's science, right? So anytime a new species is introduced to a lake, what does it do? Reproduces extremely rapidly, right?
Yes.
To try to establish itself in that ecosystem, right? And
yeah, because there's a niche there that's wide open for it, so it just takes off.
Yep. So we're seeing that, right? Zebra mussels get into a lake, and all of a sudden, oh my God, there's zebra mussels everywhere. But if you let like 7 years go by, it seems like they're still there, but not as much. It seemed to level off. Now, have you noticed that too?
What you're saying is exactly what I've been telling people about Eurasian milfoil.
Yep.
Because when it first comes into a lake, it really does dominate the population of weeds in that lake.
Yep.
And like when it first hit Minnetonka, it's going to kill off all the native plants. All the native plants in our lakes are going to be wiped out. That is completely not what happens. Completely false. Because what we see now in Minnetonka is just like certain areas of milfoil, but that you have all these native plants that are back now. It's found a balance.
Yep.
And how that comes about, I don't know.
Not spraying. They've been doing a lot of that, and there's hardly any good milfoil in the Minnetonka anymore because of the spraying. But if they wouldn't have sprayed, I think.
But it was even before they were spraying heavy.
Sure.
Because I remember back in the 90s, just like year after year, there were certain milfoil patches that I saw shrinking in size. It's like, it'd be, a certain size in 1995, and the next 96 would be a little smaller, 97, smaller yet. And you could see it just like recede from areas a little bit every year, thinner and moving away. And then pretty soon, like a spot that had heavy milfoil in 1994. By 2000, there was none. And I saw it recede, become less and less every year. So,
Sure.
And I don't know how exact. This is what I speculate about what was going on there. It's the same thing as it kind of relates to why farmers rotate their crops.
Okay.
Because when milfoil got in there, all these nutrients that were like that milfoil like responds to really well,
Yep.
that stuff hadn't been tapped.
Sure.
So it took off. Well, every year, these nutrients are used more and more and more by milfoil. And
Yep.
like with farmers and their crops, if you keep planting corn year after year after year after year in the same field,
Yep.
pretty soon the corn is like taking away all that, whatever corn specifically needs.
Yep. In the soil.
Yeah,
Yep.
in the soil, which is why a farmer will plant corn here one year, and then they'll bring in like soybeans the next just to keep rotating it.
Sure.
Then they don't run into that diminishing return.
Dude, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's how
I never even thought of that.
I have no scientific basis as to if that's what milfoil is doing, if that's a cause of it receding off of certain places where I like to fish.
Well, I think we can agree it's receding, right? And I think to me, or like a new, I think we can agree upon the fact that when a new species is introduced, it goes like this,
Yes.
and then it seems to do this, right? I think
Yeah.
a lot of people can agree on that, and I think what you said about the farming and the crops is a really educated hypothesis, or what have you, as to why that is.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's where I've put it, filed it away in my brain.
And so to me, like that milfoil, the reason why it helps the fishing is it creates a habitat, right?
Yeah. That's for, it's just, you end up with strong year classes of fish because all the fry are able to
Hide in that grass.
hide in the grass.
Yep. Zebra mussels kind of do the same thing, but yet differently. They almost they clean the water up so that as weeds grow out further, so you get a deeper weed line.
Yeah.
We've seen that on Gull Lake, where now you're seeing the weed line out in 22, 23 feet.
Yeah,
Tonka.
Yeah, you see that in all these lakes that get zebra mussels, the weed lines go deeper.
So there's that, but zebra mussels to me also do another thing is like when they're a juvenile zebra mussel's pretty soft, kind of like a boneless little buffalo wing. So I think the zebra mussels also create kind of another food source. Maybe not for the bass per se, but for the things that the bass eat.
Well, it's certainly, I know, you know what a shell cracker is? Yeah. I mean, they know for a fact that those things eat. Now, shell cracker, for those people that don't know, shell cracker is it's like a sunfish. We don't have them in Minnesota, but they're southern sunfish, and then they also have them out west in Lake Havasu, where a zebra, what they call their zebra mussel is called a quagga mussel, and apparently these shell crackers eat these quagga mussels, and they get like 5 and 6 pounders.
Right.
So imagine 5-6 pounds on fish. It's like
right. Well, a zebra mussel, I mean, call it a little protein bar.
Yeah.
You know, for whatever the fish are eating. So now, you know, the stuff the bass are eating is bigger or more protein rich. It's going to transfer to the fish. It'd be like
I know the drum eat them too.
Oh yeah, I bet the bass eat them, man.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if they do or not. I know drum do because I've seen them crapping out the shells of zebra mussels.
I think, you know, if they don't eat them on purpose, I bet when they suck up crawfish off the bottom, I bet they get a couple
maybe that's
extra to floss their teeth or whatever.
Yeah, what I saw might have been just simply that.
That's been probably the most, it's interesting to me how politicized those things are in this state.
Well, somebody's making a crap load of money off of this fear of aquatic invasive. Now, like you had said earlier, Eurasian carp, that seems like a legitimate invasive species that we need to eradicate.
Bad deal.
But some of this other stuff, the money we're dumping into these programs,
millions and millions and millions, Jim.
I mean, this is the conspiracy theory behind it.
I love it. Get your tinfoil hats on.
Yeah, everyone. Right. No, it's like I just like there's somehow somebody's behind this fear mongering of these milfoil, of zebra mussels, and it's incentive. They have incentive to do this because there's some monetary gain somewhere. I mean, because it's for sure milfoil. It's nothing to be afraid of.
Attention, all smallmouth anglers. Have you thrown the marabou jig? Have you thrown the hair jig? Well, if you have, you're going to want to listen right now. This podcast is brought to you by Veselka Fishing and Customs, a custom rod shop based out of Minnesota, and he has developed the answer, folks. What if I told you you could throw that marabou jig 30 to 50% further than you're casting it right now? Well, Dane, Mr. Veselka himself, has developed the answer. It's a custom 8-foot hair jig rod developed on a steelhead fly blank. He's put custom fly guides on this, so you're really going to be able to outcast the competition, catch more smallmouth. They aren't going to see you. What more do you need? Here's what I need you to do right now. Visit veselkafishing.com. That's VOCELKA fishing.com. This is the 8-foot hair jig rod, but this guy can build you anything you want. If you can dream it, he can do it. This episode is brought to you by just north of Memphis Barbecue. This is World Champion Barbecue. If you smoke meat and you don't like good barbecue, I do not know what to tell you right now besides you need to try some of this stuff. They've got their rub. They've got their sauces right on their website. They've got their famous dry rub award-winning seasoning that you could put on ribs, brisket, pulled pork, chicken, wings, anything you like to put on the smoker, on the oven, on the grill, any meat you like to cook, you need some of this dry rub seasoning in your life. But don't forget the sauce, because that's award-winning world champion sauce here. No matter what flavor you like, they've got 3 different sauces, and they are all good. You can drink them straight out the bottle. We've got Sweet Christie's for all you sweet-loving barbecue folk. We've got Christie's Mischief for all you spicy bass anglers out there. And then we've got Christie's Gold. And they'll sell all 3 of them in a combo. But you need to go to their website right now. It's jnomemphis.com. That's jnomemphis.com. Dry rub, sauce, barbecue. Let's go! No.
Nothing.
No.
And the zebra,
it's not even sharp.
The zebra mussel thing, I can understand why people don't want them to wash up on the shores, but it's like, but then you hear people complaining, oh, if I go on my beach, I cut my feet on them. But
my sister cut her foot on a snail.
I know.
Like,
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, swimming in the lake where my dad's property is, we don't have zebra mussels there, never have. But I've cut countless times. I've cut my feet on the natural clams that live in that lake.
A broken clamshell is about as, I mean, that'll sever a man's foot. You know?
Yeah, I've had some bad cuts. So it's.
I think we should put some money into them clamshells. Those seem like, yeah, wow, ow. Got to do something about those. No.
Yeah, poor clams.
Here's what I think it is. I think Minnesota is, you've got 10,000 lakes, and a lot of them are owned by people. Or the lake shore is consumed by people, right? And those people like to enjoy the lake a lot differently than some other people. But the voice in the political ring of that debate, there isn't fishermen in it, because the funding they get is from lake associations, right? These lake associations are made up of people that live on the lake, not necessarily fishermen. Right. So, like, this lake has an association. I don't know when the meetings are. I couldn't even tell you. But that lake has an association.
Yeah, they all have them.
They all have them. And, you know, you get a couple of Karens in a lake association. You get 3 Karens together. And holy smokes, this milfoil thing sounds pretty bad, right?
Exactly.
And you've got a really groupthink mentality that's opposite of what you and I are seeing. But they're only seeing, they don't see what we see. It's like Plato's allegory of the cave almost. Like, they see their world, and we see a totally different world as fishermen. And in the political ring, they're going to go to the money at the end of the day. But even without that, they're going to go to the voice or these lake associations. That's ultimately what's funding all of this, is these lake associations. And it seems like, I don't know if there's just not as many fishermen living on the lake, but
there's not.
No, there isn't. So
there's not.
So in terms of weight of opinion and debate, we're not even at the table having the debate, A, as fishermen, and B, if we were, there's one of us and 100 Karens, and the 100 Karens definitely, I think, contributed to what we're seeing, and I just don't think the fisherman's voice is being heard in that argument whatsoever. And if it is, it's one crazy guy at the meeting, or, you know, being looked at as a crazy guy in the meeting, because there's 10 Karens versus, you know, one Jim or whatever.
The public at large has been hearing this message of Eurasian milfoil being so bad and harmful that it's like indoctrinated into the public's education.
It's propaganda.
Yeah, you could label it that. It's not.
It's fake news.
It is that. And you know, people just don't see it that way because, I don't know, they just aren't around it enough.
Here's the deal, Karen. Stop spraying the weeds.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of things you could be telling Karen.
Karen,
I got one on my lake.
We'll pull our weeds off the trailer. We'll pull them out of the live well. We'll pull them off the tie cleats. Just stop spraying the goddamn weeds.
Dude, here's an example. Okay, now I got two stories I got to tell you. First of all, okay, on our family property's lake, there is a Karen, at least one that I know on that lake. And I don't know, I'm probably doing the right thing by just ignoring the situations, but there's so many times where I'll be sitting in the cabin thinking, maybe, you know, just come up with silly ideas how I can pester this Karen.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah,
but I haven't. But I got to do something, because every time I'm coming down, I was going to say her shoreline, but it is her shoreline to her.
Yep.
So I'm coming down her shoreline, and I come near her dock. Up opens the screen door. Out comes little fluffy, yappy dog, which runs out on the dock.
Yep.
And as long as I'm there, that dog is just yip, bark, 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 and will not stop. And I never see the Karen. She never comes out. But as soon as I go down the shoreline a ways, you know, of course, then the dog goes back inside. But every time I come by there, the dog's let out. And it's just a bark fest, and it's happened too many times where it's not coincidence anymore.
You ever accidentally miss under the dock with a half-ounce jig and?
You mean, miss a little high?
Miss a little high? Yep. Oh, that one got away from me. No, sorry about that.
It ain't the dog's.
Didn't see you there.
I would like to.
Yeah, no. You want to preserve the species that were there, right?
But I don't. It's just that person. I don't know. I don't know why do they think they can do this kind of stuff?
I don't know. But I do want to make clear that when I said Karen, I meant every Karen besides Karen Savick, because we have all the respect for Karen Savick.
Oh, yes, she's cool.
Yep,
for sure.
Yep.
But now, so then the other story was, I totally forgot what the other story was.
No worries. Well, we were talking to Karens.
Yes,
on the lake.
God dang it. It was let's move on.
Yeah, whatever.
I can't remember what that was now.
All-terrain tackle. This is kind of, maybe we can kind of close it out here a little bit. I think Haugie's down in Florida now, but that's a jig company that's become pretty big, pretty mainstream, and I give you a lot of credit for that. You've had, a lot of time probably with Steve in the early days developing, jigs. I know this one in particular that we were talking about at the beginning with this football jig, and now you've really seen that evolve into, swinging head jigs, swim baits. They've always been famous for that AT jig and stuff. Walk me through, all terrain getting started, your involvement in maybe some of the design work or whatever with some of the jigs, it's a cool story.
Yeah. I mean, you're giving me a lot of credit here. Probably don't deserve as much credit as what you're giving me, but
I like that you're humble too.
yeah,
That's okay.
You know, Steve came out with some initial. He came out with a football head. He came out with the AT jig, and I think the AT jig and the football jig might have been his first two. But you'd have to get Steve on the podcast to know for sure.
Oh, I'd love to. Yep.
But you know, it might have been the grass jig, AT jig, and football jigs first, and then he added the swim jig later.
Mighty jig.
And when I say football jig, I mean what they call the rock jig, because then the
skirtless.
Yeah, the not skirtless, but the brush, the one without the brush guard, it's called the rock jig.
Yep.
So that was the AT jig and the grass jig were first, and then what we call the football jig, which is almost the same thing as the rock jig. The football jig is one with the brush guard.
Yep.
And that came in just a year or two later after the startup of the other ones.
Sure.
So, but I helped him design the rock jig and the football jig, and the rock jig is a football jig. Let's not try to confuse things. It's just you got to call them two different things on the web page.
I understand.
So people know there's a difference.
Sure.
So I helped him with that, and I consulted him on other things. But a lot of stuff Steve just ran with his gut feeling on a lot of things, and colors and that, and of course we'd have occasional conversations regarding colors and hooks and brush guards and stuff like that. So,
sure.
But Steve did a lot of fishing, and
he deserves a lot of credit there.
Yeah,
I'm talking to you right now.
He's the man. He's the man. Yeah,
he is. Man. I have a question for you. So, unlike the rock jig, I noticed the line ties are different.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that?
Well, yes, because the rock jig, the line tie is straight off the top of the head.
Yep. So 90-degree vertical, right?
Right.
Yep.
Which is where I wanted it. But what I found out was I couldn't take this rock jig and bring it down to Southern Fisheries because I could, but I'd lose a lot of them in brush piles and stumps.
Sure.
Because it's open hook.
Yep.
And so that's when so I came to Steve. I said, Steve, we got to have something with a brush guard on it.
Yep.
Because I can't. This isn't. I mean, if I'm going to fish a football head in the South, I got to have brush guard on it.
Yep.
Because brush piles and stumps.
Yep. And that makes sense.
So we came up with this.
Yep.
This one, put the brush guard on there, and then also what also helps a jig come through brush and stumps better is if you pull the eye, if you rotate it forward just a little bit. You still want it to. You don't want it to come straight off the front because then you're going to lose a lot of that feel that it gives you.
Well, yeah, and the action.
Yeah,
yep.
And the rocker action. So we brought it forward a little bit just so it could come over stumps and brush a little better than an eye that comes straight off the top of that head.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've noticed with the AT jig, I have yet to really find a jig that comes through wood better than an AT jig, and it has that. Now that you mention it, it has a very similar placed eye.
Yeah.
It comes through hard cover really good.
Yeah.
Because of that, so that makes a lot of sense. Were the dimples your idea or Steve's?
It's my idea.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that's just to break up the outline, and maybe to grip the bottom a little better.
Yep. We didn't have tungsten back then, so anything you could do to feel a little better, and maybe it sticks a little better to the bottom.
Yeah, exactly.
It's cool stuff. And now we're seeing the swing head has really been kind of an evolution of it.
I don't fish swing heads.
I'm not saying you need to. I was going to ask if you did, and I guess you answered it. But
and I know, Steve, All Terrain Tackle has these.
I love
and
them.
A lot of guys are fans of them. But I don't know. I don't know what to think of it, because you can put like a worm on here or a craw, and it has a lot of the similar principle of a football head.
It's almost like more of a crankbait. Like,
yeah.
I mean, when you need to when you want to cover water with a football jig, it seems to loosen that up. And, well, like, think about it. I mean, Leiferman was cranking those deep spots on Tonka. You were football jigging them. I mean, what if, like, it was a crankbait bite? I mean, but that's a crankbait almost that you can throw farther and it stays in that strike zone longer.
Yep.
I think there's still a time and place for both, and I couldn't tell you when is what. That little deal, I mean, late fall for smallmouth. I mean, when they're getting on that wintering program, has been
that's a swim bait on there.
Yep.
Only does swing head.
Yep. I only do well when it's cold water on that. I usually throw like a creature bait on it.
Do you keep it moving on those late fall smallmouths? Or
typically, I mean, it depends how deep you're fishing it, how fast you move it. Obviously, in 30 feet of water with something like this, if you start to reel too fast, it's off the bottom.
Yeah. So
I move it enough to keep it on the bottom, kind of no matter what I'm doing. And you can do the drag stop thing with it too.
Okay.
It's one of those things where the one thing it's not going to do is work on the slow pull, like a football jig, right? But anything, on a medium or fast pull, is going to do that. But the one thing it won't do is this, Yeah. So when you're really crawling it, this is still to me.
I think you get more of an erratic response out of a football jig than a swing head, I think.
I agree with you in the sense of like, it's going to, like the swing head, I think you'll get more action out of this part of the bait.
Yeah.
But the entire thing, that football jig kind of is going to hunt more, I feel like. But
yeah, that's exactly it.
I don't know. If the swing head gets popular, the football jig is going to come back because everyone's throwing this. And I feel like a jig is a jig, right? Kind of.
Don't say that.
I know, right? You throw like swim baits much?
Yeah, I throw the all-terrain. Oh, okay, so like on a swim head?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the last few years I've done it quite a bit, actually.
Seems to be just a huge thing.
And with forward-facing sonar, it's just even so much more part of my game plan now.
Right. How about a big hair jig? Do you like fish a big?
Like the chicken one they're saying?
Yeah.
No.
I don't a bunch either, but I will say I've learned a few things about that chicken, and I think there's something to it.
Yeah, I
Newman's the guy to talk to about that, or Leitner, but
yeah, I didn't know Newman was on that program.
I'm surprised you didn't know that. He hasn't shut up about it for 3 years.
I knew Brad was on that, but I don't know the whole chicken thing. God, there's just so many baits out there.
Right.
And then there's the whole in the South they throw big, I don't know if it's chicken or some kind of hair they throw in the
same thing. It's kind of a creature jig, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't do much of that either, and that's probably to a fault, really. I should at least the chicken thing up here. You could point to me and say, Jim, you are not. You need to at least look into it more and play with it more.
I learned this year that I've been doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really like, I really kind of want to throw it next year.
What's wrong? Why were you what was wrong about how you were fishing it?
So I was kind of changing my cadence up too much, I think, with it.
Oh.
And, I guess this is a little nugget that I got to learn last year, and it's a little nugget for anybody who's stuck around this long, which hopefully you are. This has been a great conversation. Think about a marabou jig, but for largemouth.
Yeah.
And you retrieve it as such, and it's kind of that stupid. I was overthinking it. I was kind of doing the Southern boy kind of stop and go, and as you just reel it in. That's the secret. It's kind of stupid. And once I had some really good days with it once I learned that.
Oh, yeah. Retrieve is
can mean everything sometimes.
Kind of keep it right over the weeds. And
Yeah.
bring it back. There's been a lot of money won on it the last couple of years in Minnesota.
And that I've seen that with smallmouth with, with the marabou jigs you're talking about, but also with the what they call Damiki rigs.
Yep.
And that kind of, sometimes less action is better.
I agree. Less is more, I think, especially
Not always, but
no, but
if you're not getting bit jerking it around like a maniac, then just freaking set the rod on the
open the bail.
Yeah, open the bail, set the rod on the gunnel, and just leave it there.
Yep. That's when you know, if you're not a smoker, maybe just pull out a cigarette and don't touch it or something. Yep. I was going to ask you that with the marabou jig. Do you ever dead stick that thing or?
No.
Never.
No, I've never really tried because
you always swim it.
It's been my observation for the most, when I actually see the smallmouth in the water with my own eyeballs, and I see how they react to the, I call it the fluff, and Joe calls it the fluff. When I see them respond to it, it seems like just dead on the bottom. It's just not what they like or what they get. It just doesn't trick them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But apparently you must know of somebody, or you've experienced it yourself, where dead sticking has worked. Otherwise, you wouldn't ask the question.
Only a couple times.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't do it enough, but I know a few guys that swear by that.
Huh.
And I'm more curious, like, if I'm missing something, because I talked to a few guys, and I've had it work for me twice real good.
My first thought is, well, first of all, let me just say something about my dead sticking mentality. I don't dead stick nothing hardly.
Yeah. Yep.
So, but like we said, sometimes less action is more. But when in that context, I meant like on a Damiki rig, or what does Gussie call it? Moping.
Yep.
That style, the bait is still moving somewhat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like doing this.
No, it's
just kind of So, but dead sticking to me is throwing something out, letting it sink to the bottom, and just sitting there on the bottom.
Jig worming at its finest.
I have a super hard time doing that. So
I'll do it with the jig worm, and it seems like or a Nico rig, and I struggle to do it with any other lure.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah,
Ned rig.
But to me, dead sticking to me is like throwing it there and just letting it sit there for like 10 seconds. And I don't do that. If I'm throwing a jig worm or a Nico rig, it gets to the bottom, I might let it sit there just for a tiny bit before I move it again. And so dead sticking with what is my point of this whole? Where am I getting to? We're talking about the marabou jig and dead stacking, and that I just don't. I just don't do much dead sticking, regardless of the bait.
Makes sense. You only have 2 days of practice.
Yeah, exactly. Practice is limited, and even in competition, I still will fish a bait really slow, and I might pause it for a second or two on the bottom, but then I'm moving it again.
Team tournaments have helped me, I think, a bunch with training myself to do that more, because you've got 2 guys, so one guy can, we're gonna fish this weed line area for 20 minutes in the morning, right?
Yeah.
The guy in the back has time to dead stick something, right?
Yeah.
Versus if you're fishing by yourself, you're always kind of a little bit on the move.
Yeah.
So I think but Minnetonka has dead sticking has served me a lot better on Minnetonka than a lot of other lakes.
That goes back to the 90s, because I know guys that would dead stick then and
hook them in the ass
and swear by it, and I'm like, I just can't do that. I can fish a bait slow, but I can't just let it sit there.
Not fish it at all. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I can let
it's kind of a weird concept.
I can throw it out there and let it sit there for a couple seconds, and then move it, but I can't just let it. If I know there's a school right there and I throw it out and I can't just let it sit there
and sit there, knowing that there's a school right there.
And see, I can let it sit there, but if we're moping, for some reason, I do not have like the same patience when I'm holding the line tight under the boat. I don't know why.
Oh,
And maybe you're the opposite.
yeah, my tournament partner is really good at that.
Mine too.
He's good at the whole moping thing, which I've been good at it too at times. And that whole moping thing, it's like, that was another thing that I was doing before it's just something we started doing up at Rainy Lake.
Well, smelt bite.
And and nobody really had to show us that. We got little hints of stuff going on, but we kind of took it upon ourselves and just evolved. It just evolved kind of organically on its own as to what we're doing. And then, then we were hearing about what other guys were doing and like, oh yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. And then we evolved our presentations, different directions from there. But so we were in on that way early too, which was getting back to competitively getting in on early on one of those little tidbits of information that are crucial. Nobody's really unveiled it except a few people. Get in early on that, and that's going to pay dividends.
Absolutely.
In performance and placement in tournaments.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, I'll be honest, man, this has been just a huge blessing. I really appreciate you making the trip out here. I think I could talk to you for about 10 more hours, but I think
we could go on and on.
Yeah, dude. So I think that means you got to come back sometime to the Galaxy. And I know you've been a huge inspiration for me. This has been a blast. We're going to wrap this up now. For those of you who don't know Jim Moynagh, hopefully you know him a little bit better now. He's got a lot of sponsors. Is there any kind of sponsors you wanted to mention before we close off the show here?
Well, I've got to mention my main sponsor, and I can't do this stuff without these sponsors.
Absolutely.
I'm so grateful to have them. My main sponsor is, and we just happen to have this calendar laying here, is Bridgeford. They make meat snacks like beef jerky, and this is their Bridgeford calendar. So there I am, Mr. December. So
what fisherman doesn't love a good meat snack?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So beef jerky, salamis, sliced pepperonis, whole salamis. They make something called monkey bread, which is in the bakery freezer section.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's fan favorite.
Oh yeah. I like monkey bread.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff you can take in the boat. Not the monkey bread. Well, you could take that too in the boat, but the meat snacks are a lot of it's boat food.
Absolutely. That's like the perfect people to work with.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
So then, of course, we talked about all-terrain tackle. I purposely wore this Blackfish shirt because they're another sponsor. Mercury Outboards, Lowrance Electronics.
Yep.
They've been with me for a long time.
Ranger Boats you've been with forever.
1995 is when I got on with them.
Wow.
Makota's helped me out. Gosh, whenever I do the sponsor listing, I always afraid I'm going to leave somebody off of it.
You're good, Jim. I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that.
No, it's good to mention them. Then I got my own YouTube channel. If anybody ever wants to check that out,
highly recommend.
Well, I appreciate that. It's kind of low tech, low budget, but
you're real. You don't change who you are, man. That's what I love about those. I love your recaps. I love your shows because you're Jim and you don't pretend to be anybody else. And I think I wish the world would appreciate that a little bit more. And hopefully you get a few more views now because of that. But
yeah, well, it's it's that just brings about the importance of social media in tournament fishing. It's like sponsors want that now. So I'm a tournament angler first. And social media guy second out of necessity because the sponsors want that.
Well, you're here because of your tournament fishing and what you've done there, and I'm not having you here because of your Facebook performance, and I could care less, dude. It's so I think that's the right mentality.
Yeah, I care about the performance of my social media because,
of course,
because my sponsors are interested in that. So
absolutely.
But it's just, I'm not gonna. I'm a tournament angler, man. So I'm gonna read about tournament fishing. I'm gonna watch tournament videos. I'm not gonna watch videos on how to make my Facebook perform better. That's just not going down like that.
Dude, you are a basser to the core.
Basser to the core. I know.
I don't think there's anything else in you besides bassing.
What's the matter with me?
Nothing. You're like, that's like how I feel. Like, what's the matter with me? Yeah, no, but that's a good way to feel, man. And that just shows you're where you, don't take this the wrong way, but you're doing the right thing. You're where you belong.
Yeah. Although you asked me earlier, what's my hobbies? And with all this snow around, I do like to get on a snowboard every year or two.
Snowboard?
Every year or two, I get out.
Cool.
I got my own snowboard. It says "Until Death" written on it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I bought it at a pawn shop.
No shit.
Yeah, and it's written in Spanish, so I didn't know what it said, and then
Estoy bien.
And then somebody said, "Oh God, that means until death." So I'm like, "Oh my God, well, I don't want that. I don't want that to happen when I'm snowboarding."
Dang. So you snowboard too? That's badass.
Well,
shit.
Yeah. Well, every 2 years, but I love it,
dude. That's some good adrenaline. Do you like travel for that, or do you just a couple hills?
Just in Minnesota. Although years ago, I had my snowboard out in the Rocky Mountains snowboarding.
I bet that was
kick ass.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yep. I'd come home with a broken leg, but it sounds real fun.
Oh, God.
Chairlifts scare the hell out of me. I don't know what it is.
If you snowboard every 2 years like I do, getting off the chairlift is always an adventure.
Oh God, I get scared on skis. I can't imagine like tripping over my snowboard. I'm a klutz. So.
Oh my gosh, it's every time off the chair with the snowboard's an adventure.
Yeah. So do you like go through the terrain park and like shred a rail, or are you more black diamond kind of guy?
No, I'm like the blue square hill guy.
Yeah, me too.
But I'm not afraid to just point it straight downhill and see how fast I can go.
Yeah. Oh geez, man, I got to do them S's or else you get rolling, man.
Oh, I know. I'm probably freaking risking life and limb when I do that, but I don't know. I mean, I put on the brakes at some, to a point, but that's why I like the blue square hills. That way I can't get too out of hand.
Yeah. Well, dude, that is, so you don't just bass fish. Okay. Once in a blue moon.
No. Yeah. Once in a blue moon, there's something else I'll find to do.
Jim, this has been a dream come true. Thanks so much for joining us here at the Bass Galaxy, making the trip out here. Us in Minnesota, we're going to be rooting for you this year. You got unfinished business. Go get them. Thanks again, man.
All right. Thanks, Aaron.